Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 true unexplained events reported by cemetery workers, we descend into the quietest places on Earth, cemeteries where the living are outnumbered and the dead are never truly still. These are first-hand accounts from the caretakers, the night guards, the gravediggers, people who have heard whispers from sealed crypts, seen lights that move without source, and watched shadows crawl where no one stands. This is a new channel, and my goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers watch and leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a cemetery in your town that gives you chills, type its name. Because those who tend the graves know one thing better than anyone else. Sometimes what's buried doesn't stay quiet for long. Kill the lights. Silence the world. Take a slow breath. And let us begin. I'm not the kind of person who tells ghost stories. I fix things. I mow lines straight enough to make a drone pilot smile. I coil hoses properly. When something squeaks, I find the squeak and I make it stop. That's why I took the night shift at Oak Hill Cemetery in Central Florida. Extra money, quiet hours, and a place where problems are usually simple. A busted sprinkler. Raccoons in the trash, some kid who thinks the back fence is a shortcut. Solve log, clock out. I started in late August when the air sits on you like a wet towel and the mosquitoes are mean enough to make you slap yourself. The day crew showed me the usual routines. Fuel the mowers, check the irrigation timers, bring the flags in if a storm's coming, and lock the iron entrance gate at 10 sharp. 2 heavy chains, 2 weathered brass padlocks, same number on both locks, 1769, so nobody has to guess in the rain. Lock the side service gate too. Confirm the cameras are recording. Leave the office key under the overturned terracotta pot by the back steps. Not rocket science. The old-timer on the crew, a guy named Sam Ortega, had been there 27 years. He walked like all the weight of the place had folded itself into his knees, friendly enough, but his voice always sounded like it had learned to whisper and never fully remembered how to speak up again. He was the one who handed me the ring with the 2 lock keys and said, "You hear the gate creak after you lock it? Don't answer." I thought he was making a joke I didn't get. He wasn't smiling. "It's Florida," I said. "Metal expands. Chain slips. Wind catches it." Sam nodded once and looked past me at the archway. The entrance is a crescent of welded oak leaves with Oak Hill worked into the curve. If you don't know what to look for, you'd assume it's any small-town cemetery gate. If you do, you notice how the hinges angle a degree off plumb, like the gate wants to stand open and someone taught it to be polite about it. "Lock it at 10, Sam said. "Every night. No exceptions. If you're 5 minutes late and it's quiet, it won't seem like a big deal. Lock it anyway. You'll see." The first week was ordinary. The office smells like old toner and pine sol. A radio on the desk bleats weather alerts and the same 3 classic rock songs. We have 4 cameras, 1 on the archway, 1 pointing down the front lane lined with live oaks, 1 on the west fence where somebody keeps dumping yard clippings, and 1 on the maintenance shed. The entrance cam has a motion sensor that wakes the recorder if anything bigger than a squirrel moves through its frame. On day 5, I did the lockup at 10, like always. The brass was slick with humidity, but the chains were good and tight. I gave the left gate a tug, solid. I gave it 1 more just to be the guy who tugs twice. Still solid. On my way back to the office, I heard it. A long hinge cry from behind me. The kind of sound that makes the hair on your arms stand up even if you're a rational grown man. I turned around involuntarily. The gates were still closed, the chains still looped, but the sound had happened. You don't imagine that particular metal-on-metal yowl. It carries in your bones. I told myself it was the wind. A gust had pushed the leaves, the hinges had flexed, and the sound had popped like an elbow. I finished the rounds, filled out the log, and kept my mouth shut. The next morning I mentioned it anyway. Not trying to be dramatic. Just, "Hey, after 10 last night the gate made that sound like it moved." Sam listened without nodding or shrugging. He took a yellow notepad and drew a little box for the office, a circle for the gate, and an arrow between them. Then he put a dot on the arrow about halfway. "Where were you when you heard it?" he asked. "Between the 2nd and 3rd oak on the left, about here." He put an X there and wrote the time next to it, 10:07 p.m., and tucked the pad away like it was a receipt he needed for his taxes. "Okay," he said. "If it happens again, write the time down right away. If you can, look at your phone clock when you hear it. Don't guess later. Why? So you don't talk yourself into or out of what you heard. That night 10 came with a heat lightning flicker over the tree line. I did the chain, spun the locks, tugged the left gate twice, the right gate once, and started down the lane. The frog sounded like 100 squeaky toys. My shirt was sticking to me in 3 different places. And there it was. Same drawn-out cry. I looked at my phone. 10:06:54. I watched the seconds crawl to 57, 58, 59. Yeah, I noted it. It felt stupid and precise in a way that comforted me. Data makes anybody calmer. Back in the office, I pulled up the camera feed. The entrance cam shows the arch and a slice of the road out front. Across the 2 lanes, there's a dollar store. Its sign stutters all night between doll and lar because 2 middle letters rusted off in a storm, and nobody cares enough to replace them. The feed was normal, fireflies blinking, a late car, and then the gate. It shifted, yes. It didn't open, not exactly. It pulled a fraction inward and then pushed slightly out, like someone had leaned their weight against it from the outside and then let go. My stomach did an elevator thing watching that. The chain didn't move. The padlocks didn't move. But the gate did. The timestamp on the video read 10:06:54. The next readable moment was 10:07 Tagu. In between, a static smear where the numbers should have been. 6 seconds. The DVR recorded the motion event and put a little yellow marker above it, like it was proud to have seen something. On the clip list, it shows the clip's length as 8 seconds. It plays only 2. 6 seconds are missing. I rewound twice to see if the missing stretch would magically appear when asked nicely. It didn't. I copied the clip to a thumb drive for the file and left a note on the log in calm handwriting. Gate movement noted. Timestamp drop of 6s. The following afternoon, Sam poured coffee into a paper cup at the break table, didn't drink it, and said, "So it's 6 for you too?" "For me too?" He folded the note over once, then again, like he was packing a small idea into his pocket. He didn't look at me when he talked, which made what he said feel like something he'd recited before. The first time the gate opened on its own, I was 28 and stubborn. We had a hurricane coming in, and I stayed late to bring the flags down and tie the tarps. I heard the gate clang, not creak, clang. I ran out there thinking some kids had slipped in. The chain was still tight, but the gate was swung all the way back against the stopper like a hand had pushed it. The camera caught it. We checked the stamp. 6 seconds missing. We had a tech come out. He swapped the camera, swapped the DVR, even swapped the cable, said it might be a thermal thing. A year later, it did it again. Another storm, 6 gone. Always 6. You think it's electrical? I think it is what it is, he said. We keep blocking it. It keeps doing what it does when it wants to. He wasn't being spooky. He was being practical in a way I didn't know bothered me yet. Like if your car pulls left and the mechanic tells you, keep a hand on it. Okay, you can do that. You still don't love the road. The stories started bleeding into the job after that. Not big ones. Little frictionless things that made your brain work harder than your body. A name tag turned up on the wrong desk. Keys I knew I'd set on the file cabinet were in the sink. The old office microwave would finish its countdown and stop at 06 instead of 00. If I set my phone on the desk and timed a minute on the DVR clock, I'd get 54 seconds. I tried it the other way. Set a minute on the DVR, time it on the phone. Same mismatch. 6 seconds shaved off the bricks of time when they sat still inside that office. I asked the day manager, a woman named Donna who wore bright coral lipstick and could find any plot record with her eyes closed, if we'd had any issues before. She gave me the kind of answer people give when they have to live with you after they're done talking. Don't prop the office door open after dark. The AC can't keep up. Bring the flags in if the radar shows orange or worse. If you're going to call the sheriff for anything, call before you walk out there. Dispatch likes a heads up. Has anyone ever broken in? Not in the way you mean, she said, and clicked a binder shut so firmly the spine popped. On Labor Day weekend, a thunderstorm rolled in sideways. The kind where the lightning doesn't strike so much as lift off from every metal thing and suspend for a second. Before it answers itself, the oak branches writhed like they were alive. I did the rounds at 8 because waiting made me itch. Tied down anything that could fly. The flag came in. I even moved the plastic angels from the newer graves under the shelter by the office. After 10, I locked the gate. The chains were slick and warm like handling a living snake. I walked the lane slowly, staying under the trees because the rain hit less there. I had almost reached the office when the clang rolled across the lane like a thrown hubcap. It wasn't the hinge cry this time. It was a clean metal-on-metal slam that made my teeth buzz. I turned so fast I slipped on the wet blacktop and went down on one knee. I swore, pushed up, and bolted back toward the arch. I was still moving when I realized I was running toward the sound as if it could be solved by catching it in the act. Which is a dumb impulse and also exactly how I'm wired. The gate stood blown wide as if the wind had hands. The chain stayed looped around the bars, but it wasn't taut anymore. It hung with slack like a necklace that had lost the throat it was supposed to hold. Both locks were still on the chain. I put my hand on the gate and I swear I felt a hum in the metal. Not vibration exactly, more like when you touch a refrigerator and know it's working. Behind me, my radio crackled with a fuzz that made words where there weren't any. The display didn't light up. No one had pressed transmit. A voice came through anyway, calmer than I felt. A man's voice, nothing spooky about it except for the timing. I couldn't place the accent. Not old, not young. Don't go out, it said. Not yet. I turned in a circle looking for headlights on the road. A figure in the rain. Anything that would convince me I wasn't about to be the idiot in a story who ignores a timely warning. The road was empty. The dollar store sign was trying and failing to spell a complete word. I stood with one wet hand on the gate and one on the chain, and I waited for something to be obvious. The wind dropped without getting gentler. The rain tapped its fingers on everything it could reach. The voice didn't repeat. I pulled the gate back to where it belonged. The metal moved easily, which it never does. I looped the chain and yanked it to make the links bite the paint. Both locks were still set to 1769 and closed. I checked them by feel and then by sight, which is what you do when you don't trust your fingers anymore. Good. Done. Locked. I stepped back. The gate creaked. You've got to be kidding me, I said aloud, because talking to something as if it can be shamed into behaving is another part of my wiring. Back in the office, I watched the clip 3 times. At 10:02:10, the gate is closed. At 10:02:11, it's starting to open. At 10:02:12, the picture scrapes to gray and the timestamp that should read 10:02:13. 15, 16, 17 is a blank. It resumes at 10:02:18 with the gate fully open, chain looped but hanging slack like paper. The little yellow motion marker is proud again. 8 seconds recorded, 2 seconds to see, 6 seconds to imagine. I copied the clip, printed a still, taped it to the log with a note. Strong winds during event. Lock integrity maintained. The copier jammed halfway and left a clear square of photo where the chain should be. I printed again. It came out fine. I don't have a moral for that, except it taught me you start seeing patterns once you want to see them, which is dangerous in any job and especially bad in one like this. The next afternoon, a sheriff's deputy pulled into the office lot. Deputy Collins, 40-ish, built like a center of gravity. He'd known Sam since school. He stood with his thumbs on his duty belt and watched the entrance through the office window like the gate owed him money. "You been getting the calls?" he asked me. "What calls?" He scratched his chin and left a small smear of rain grit. "Night desk at dispatch keeps getting hang-ups from this number after 10. They ping it to the tower by the dollar store, but it's listed to the cemetery. Comes through with zeros where the last 4 digits go. If you ask me if that's possible, I'm going to say no, and then we're both going to pretend we believe me." "We don't dial out at night," I said. "The landline in here is unplugged. I hate the way it rings. The cordless in the shop is dead. Have them call it back." "I'll answer." "They tried," he said. "A woman answered once, said hello like she used to work there. Said she was waiting on someone to lock the gate. That was 3 nights ago. Night desk lady swears her name was..." He squinted, looking for the right name in the dust motes. "Alvarez?" "No, close. Andres? Something like that." "Alvarez is the guy in the groundskeeper memorial," I said without meaning to. "We have a little wooden plaque above the break table. It lists 3 names and 3 dates. Miguel Alvarez, 1983. Susan Duncan, 1998. Harold Greeley, 2007. No stories, just names and years. Somebody keeps a silk carnation stuck next to Alvarez's name." Collins nodded in a way that meant he knew that already and didn't like that he knew it. "Lock the gate," he said. "Call me before you walk out if you hear anything you shouldn't." He put his card on the desk without pushing it toward me and left. If the story ended there, it would be weird but survivable. Gates move in wind. DVR's glitch. Dispatch console's hiccup. None of that needs a haunting to make sense of it. But there's a night after the deputy's visit that makes my mouth dry when I try to tell it right. Not because a ghost walked up and introduced itself. Because what happened is very small and very hard to shrug off. And small things that can't be shrugged off end up sticking to you like burrs you carry home. The forecast that night said the storm would slide south. It didn't. It threw its shoulder into us around 9. The sky went green like an old bruise and the trees bent into parentheses. I was alone on shift. I brought the flags in at 8:30 and left the office door propped while I ran the cart back and forth. I know, Donna says not to do that. The AC whined in protest from the ceiling grid. I figured I'd have the door closed again in 30 seconds. I get cocky like that when I've had too much coffee. As I set the last flag on its bracket, the office phone rang. I hadn't touched the plug since the day before. It rang with that rich old Bell sound desk phones make in movies. I stared at it and let it ring. I don't know why. Answering would have been the normal thing. I watched the little screen light up with a line of zeros. I watched it stop. I watched the seconds count 0001, 0002, 0003, and then jump to 0010. I picked up then because not answering felt like I was letting something write the rules. Oak Hill Cemetery, I said. Night maintenance. A woman on the other end let out a breath you could mistake for a bad connection. Her voice was clear past it. Older, ironed, flat calm. You've got 6, she said. Use it. Who is this? The line clicked like a tongue against teeth, then died. The office clock on the wall read 9:58. My phone said 9:52. I've never been good at minding 2 clocks once they disagree, but being bad at something doesn't mean you aren't stuck with it. I locked the gate at 10 by my phone just to be clean. The wind made it hard to get the chain quiet. I got it the 3rd time. I palmed each lock and said the code in my head like a prayer. I walked back deliberately. I counted my footsteps to drown out any hinge sounds I didn't want to hear. I reached the 3rd oak on the left when the creak broke open over my head like a slow zipper. I didn't turn right away. I forced myself to look at my phone. 10:54. I could hear the rain sliding off the metal curve of the arch. I looked up. The gate was closed. In the pool of the dollar store's flicker, I could see the chain was taut. No movement. No kids, no car. The creak was still happening. Prolonged and high like somebody trying to speak without being noticed by whoever was inside the room. And then the sound cut off. Not at the end of its note, but mid-syllable. It just wasn't there anymore. The quiet after was loud enough to feel. I did what Sam told me never to do. I answered it. I left the lane and walked back toward the arch. I told myself I was checking for damage. I told myself I was the kind of person who fixed things. I heard my boots slap and stick. I counted 6 steps because I knew to count 6. I reached for the chain. Something happened then that my brain still refuses to tell as one smooth action. The chain was where it should be. My hand was on it. The padlock was the same scarred brass with the same scar of blue paint from where somebody had slapped a fence post in 2009. I blinked. Between my hand lifting and my eyes opening again, there were 6 seconds that don't belong to me. I know that because the DVR later told me. But also because of how the world had changed positions like a kid switching places in a middle school play. I was no longer inside the gate. I was outside the arch, standing in the road shoulder, barefoot in a flood of warm water up to my ankles. I looked down dumbly at my feet and saw them pale and slick without boots. I looked back at the ground I must have walked across to get where I stood. There were no prints. The chain was still tight. Both locks were fast. The gate was closed. My first thought wasn't fear. It was irritation. Like the way you feel when your keys aren't in the bowl because you know you put them in the bowl. My boots sat side by side in front of the arch like a kid who'd been told to wait right there. The office door behind me, behind the gate, was still propped on its wedge. The fluorescent tube inside stuttered. I watched it stutter for a count of 6 and then smooth out, as if it had figured something out. The radio at my hip made a sound like a throat clearing without a mouth. Not yet, the same man said. Hold a minute. I bent to grab my boots and the water sloshed against my shins. The road was empty. The rain was sifting itself thinner. From the service road to my left, a pair of headlights rounded the bend slower than usual, the way people drive when they're both late and careful. A minivan. Blue. The driver had her face almost on the glass to see. She didn't notice me. She aimed for the far lane without thinking, tires whispering through runoff. My phone buzzed a text alert. Weather service tornado warning expired. I jammed my feet into my boots and almost fell because wet boots are the same as marbles inside your shoes. I hustled to the side gate by the service lane. It was chained but not locked, because day shift sometimes cobbles the chain and lock together and leaves the padlock hanging open. Tonight the lock was thrown. Of course it was. I stood there dumb. My office key was on the desk, under the terracotta pot, where the office door was propped open for the AC to die by inches. I pulled my shirt over my head and pushed it through the fence links to make a cushion, then climbed. I'm not proud. It was either that or wait for Sam to show up at dawn, and I wasn't ready to stand in the rain like a lawn ornament. I fell the last 2 feet, landed badly, swore, and limped across the grass like a thief in a bad movie. When I got to the office, the door wasn't propped anymore. It was closed and locked. I put my forehead against the glass and counted to 6. On 6, the light inside turned on by itself. Not the halogen over the copier, the little desk lamp we keep by the log. It clicked, buzzed, and glowed. I knocked. Not at any moment in my life did I expect to knock on the door of the office I worked in, but there we were. Once, twice. On the 3rd knock, the lock turned. The door cracked an inch and stopped like it had something behind it. It wasn't something. It was my chair, pushed tight against the knob at an angle that shouldn't have made sense but worked. I pulled the door, pushed the chair, edged myself inside. The AC hit me in the face like laughter. I sat down. I closed the door. I didn't write any of that in the log. I made a new page the way you do when you don't want anyone to see the page before. And I wrote the most boring version that would still be useful to an imaginary future person. Storm conditions. Gate secured. Office locked. I added as an afterthought, 1-minute discrepancy between system and phone clocks. The next day, I showed Sam the DVR clip. It's 30 seconds long. You can watch me walk toward the gate. You can watch me put my hand on the chain. The timestamp reads 10:54. It blinks once like an eye that's caught something in the corner of a room, and then it reads 10:01 with me gone. The camera on the road shoulder, nobody looks at that one much, shows me appearing like a cut from a cheap video. One frame I'm not there. The next I am, water up to my ankles, barefoot. Both clips missed the same 6 seconds. Sam didn't say I told you so. He didn't tell me to quit. He took my note from the night before and laid it next to a page from his yellow pad, where he'd written times in a neat column. Each with a date, each with a notation. Gate sound, open, chain slack, voice on radio. On his page, the numbers in the column all had a 6 somewhere in them. 06, 16, 26, 36, 46, 56. It looked like superstition until you hated the pattern, and then it looked like a rule. Does it mean anything? I asked. He chewed the skin on his inner cheek the way people do when they're trying not to make a face. It means we keep locking it. Donna started putting a little sign on the office door at 5. Please close fully after entering, thank you. Somebody, maybe her or maybe the place itself, stopped propping it after that. The AC did better. The phone stopped ringing with zeros. Or I didn't hear it. I moved my chair so the door couldn't jam against it. I took the terracotta key out from under the pot because I didn't want there to be a key to find. We make small changes when we can't make the big one. I thought a lot about the woman on the phone. The way her voice came through without being spooky at all. The way she said you've got 6 like she was telling me a bus schedule. I asked Donna carefully if Susan Duncan, the name in the middle on the memorial, had ever worked the desk. She said she had. She died in her car in the parking lot after a shift when her heart forgot to beat. Donna told it like facts. She didn't offer a moral. She doesn't believe in adding those. On my last week there, yeah, I left. I'll tell you why. The gate behaved. The weather cooled. Kids started school and the fresh flowers on the new graves leaned less in the afternoon heat. It felt almost normal enough to make me feel foolish. I thought maybe I'd work through the fall, stack some money, make peace with being the kind of person who believes DVRs just miss time sometimes. Then on a Tuesday, a new guy came to start days, a kid named Eli, ex-roofer with hands cut in the same places I've cut mine. And I showed him the locks and the chain and the code, and heard myself say the line I swore I'd never say. You'll hear the gate creak. Don't answer. He laughed in a way that didn't make fun of me exactly. He's 22. He hasn't learned yet that a shrug is a shield. That night I stayed late to help with a broken sprinkler. The kind that pops up and pees sideways until the grass drowns. I was still there at 10 when the gate had to be locked. I watched Eli loop the chain and whip it tight the way I showed him. He looked at me for approval. I gave him a thumbs up and tried to sound older than I am. Good, don't be tempted to lock it early, okay? People come late. He nodded, and for a second I saw how we keep each other alive by passing along tiny rules and never explaining why. On my way back to the shed, my radio popped with that dry sound. It didn't light up. Nobody was pressing transmit. I stopped without deciding to. Don't go out, the man said, almost bored. Not yet. I'm not, I said, telling a radio that didn't want my voice. We're not doing anything. There was a pause where I could hear the room around his voice. No, not a room. The way air sounds in a car with the windows cracked. Then another voice layered over it, softer and flatter. The woman again, like the same call but closer. You've got 6, she said. I wanted to ask 6 for what, 6 for who, 6 until when? I didn't, I went inside. I sat at the desk. I opened the log and wrote the time and let my pen hover for the seconds I didn't trust. I watched the DVR clock stop for a blink and pick back up like it had remembered it was on stage. A kid on a bike came down the road a minute later, a little too fast, his front wheel slicing water up over his shoes. He wasn't headed for the gate. He was heading past. A dark sedan came the other way with its headlights at that really bright angle some cars have when they're loaded heavy in the back. The light washed the arch and the boy and the chain and the puddles into one hard white canvas. For the span of a breath, the kid and the car and the gate were all the same thing, moving bright and right there. Then the car passed. The boy kept pedaling. The light went away and the gate creaked like a throat that had held back a cough and couldn't anymore. All of that could be nothing. Most of our lives is the story of nothing happening, and us telling it back to ourselves like we're interesting. But the next morning, Donna found a voicemail on the office line. It was a pocket dial kind of recording. Shoe sounds, wind, someone breathing. Then my voice, which I don't like hearing on recordings because I sound unsure even when I'm not. Gates open, my voice said, calm as if I were reading a menu. And then silence for 6 seconds, which I know because the counter moved and the sound didn't. And then my voice again. Gates closed. Donna asked me if I'd called and I said no, because I didn't remember calling, and also because I didn't want to be the guy who brought his own voice into the office on a phone like a dead bird dropped on a porch. I quit the week after, not because I was scared every minute. I wasn't. That's the thing most stories get wrong. You aren't scared every minute. You're uncomfortable and then you're bored and then you're embarrassed you were ever uncomfortable. You get an urge to tidy the same drawer 3 times. You stand in doorways listening for the sound you hope doesn't come, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get through your shift and drive home and put your boots by the door and make eggs in a pan that tries its best, and you feel ordinary. I left because ordinary started feeling like the part that wasn't true anymore. I could handle the gate. I couldn't handle the way time kept forgetting us in 6-second bites. I still live not far away. When storms push through, I sometimes end up at the light by the dollar store. If I'm first in line, I can see the arch. I can see the chain if the light is right. Last week, the wind knocked a street sign sideways and they haven't fixed it yet. So the view's even cleaner than usual. At 10 higher by my dashboard clock, the gate stayed still. At 10:54, the power flickered in the store and the doll sign went briefly whole, bright as it must have been once. It held there for a long second. Then LR, then nothing. I looked at the arch because of course I did. The gate didn't move. I listened hard as if the creak could travel across traffic and rain and glass. I couldn't hear it. That should have helped. It didn't. Because from where I sat, I could see something else I never noticed when I stood inside it. The iron leaves welded into the arch aren't just leaves. Every 8th leaf has a little notch cut into it, no bigger than the tip of a key. There are 64 leaves on the arch, 8 with notches on the left, 8 on the right, 16 little keyholes you wouldn't register unless you were counting. I don't know what they're for. Probably nothing. Decorative, some catalog choice some town clerk made in 1998 without thinking. I know. I changed my phone's passcode from 4 digits to 6 last night, which is a thing I should have done years ago for security. And not because I looked up and realized I'd been writing 1769 on scraps of paper during meetings. When I woke up this morning, The time on the microwave was 6 minutes off from the time on the stove. I fixed the microwave. Afterwards, I stood there in my socks and watched one clock count 59, 0, while the other counted 53, 54. I wanted to throw both in the yard and start over with sundials. Here's the part I shouldn't add, but I'm going to because the whole point was to tell this like I'd tell it to someone who might have to lock a gate someday. I went back last night late after midnight. Not inside. I parked across by the dollar store, which is closed at that hour except for the kid mopping, while singing under his breath. The rain had moved on. The sky was like a wet book. I rolled the window down and listened. The frogs were doing their choir thing. A cat ghosted by in that suspicious way cats have, tail high like a question mark. At 12:06 by my dash, a woman passed under the arch on the inside, walking toward the office. Not a ghost with gauze, not a shape with no face. A woman in tan slacks and a printed blouse carrying a zippered bank bag the way office people do when they've counted the petty cash twice. She didn't look at the gate. She didn't look at me. She walked like someone who had done this 1,000 times and could do it in the dark. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a key ring with a lot of weight on it and set it on the brick by the office door. She stood still for a second the way people do when they're trying to remember if they forgot something. Then she went inside. The door closed. The office light came on. The lamp, not the overhead. I sat there with my hands on the wheel like I'd forgotten how to use them. I drove home. I slept. I woke up angry at how convenient my memory wanted to make that woman. I told myself it could have been Donna, even though Donna doesn't work nights and never wears anything but polo shirts. I told myself it could have been a trick of the light, even though I saw the zipper on the bank bag and the scuff on the right heel of her shoe. I told myself it could have been nothing, and maybe it was. At 10 tonight, I'll probably end up at that same light. Habit, I guess. I'll watch the arch. I'll listen to whatever you call the sound the world makes when it decides not to tell you something. I'll feel my phone buzz for a weather alert I don't need, and I'll look down at it, because we all look down at them. Maybe I'll miss the 6 seconds when something happens and has the courtesy to do it where only the cameras can see. That would be fine with me. But if you ever find yourself with a chain in your hand and a gate that thinks it knows better, and your radio says not yet, here's the only advice I've got. Count to 6 out loud. Not 5, not 7, 6. If a phone rings with zeros, don't say hello. If a voice tells you you've got 6, believe it. And when the hinge cries like it's about to say your name, lock the gate the way you always do and leave it be. Some things open without permission. Some things close and don't explain. We keep working. We write it down. We pretend we're the ones keeping time, and maybe we are. For everything except those missing pieces that belong to the gate and the storm and whoever is still on the other end of a line that shouldn't ring. I don't expect anyone to believe this, but I want it out of me. My name's Evan. I'm 27, and until this summer I worked grounds at Greenvale Memorial Park out by the Loop, just outside town where the subdivisions give way to scrub and mesquite. It's a pretty cemetery in daylight. Oak clusters, sandstone markers, those soft sloped sections that look like someone ironed the earth. People always say it's peaceful. If you work there after sunset, you learn that peaceful has another meaning. I started in May. The job was simple. Mow, trim, pick up flowers that blew away, set the tents for services, make sure the sprinkler heads weren't clogged with grass, help the backhoe guy when a plot needed opening or closing. We were a small crew. Rios was our foreman, ex-army, neat beard, the type that fixes broken tools in silence because it's faster than lecturing you. Doug ran the backhoe. Faye in the office handled paperwork and families. Hector worked nights as a security guard. And then there was Lance, the new guy who started 2 weeks after me. He was 21, thin as a broom handle, always buzzing with energy like his nerves ran on caffeine and static. He liked the big zero-turn mower, said the hum of it made his brain stop chewing itself. We used cheap blue two-way radios so Rios could boss us around without hiking 5 acres. Channel 2 was ours. They lived on our belts and we kept spare batteries charging in the maintenance shed. Those radios weren't fancy, but they worked. You'd hear the interference when a storm was building, or a truck with a CB rolled by on the frontage road. You learned to tune out the hiss. The first time something happened was on a Tuesday in June. Late day when the sun slides behind the oaks and the west side of the park turns into these long black bands like folded velvet. Lance was cutting the south lawn. I was string trimming along Section D, careful not to chip any headstones. The radio on my belt was turned low, more habit than anything. I heard Rios call check-in, heard Doug grouse about the dull chain on the saw, heard Faye ask if anyone had seen a bouquet from earlier. Normal noise. Then Lance's radio crackled. You know that sound when you lean on the button and then let it go and there's a breath? A ghost of a word? That only this didn't trail off. It formed into a voice so faint I thought it was another crew stepping on our channel. It said, "Stop the machine." I didn't pay attention because people leave their mowers running to talk all the time. But the mower shut off. The hum died dead. I looked over. Lance was sitting there under the oak by the old section, hands off the bars, head cocked. Then my radio came alive with Rios barking, "Why'd you kill it?" "Thought you called me," Lance said. "You said to stop. I didn't. Keep going. We have the veteran service at 6. Lance started it again. Later, when we were rolling the tents back into the shed, he told me the voice hadn't sounded like Rios. I asked him what it sounded like. He made a face. Like my dad when he's on the porch talking through the screen door. Like he's not in the same room. On Friday, it happened again. This time I heard it too, clear enough through my own radio that I looked around for who else was keyed in. "Stop the machine," it said, like a recommendation from an old friend. Lance was halfway through Section B when he pulled the bar, and the mower coughed into quiet. Rios came limping up. He had a knee that hated uneven ground and said, "We do not stop unless we see a headstone under the deck or a child. You get that?" Lance swallowed and nodded. He didn't tell Rios why he'd stopped. He told me later at the soda machine near the office. He said, "It wasn't just the voice that time. I felt the bars go cold. Not like metal in shade cold. Like freezer burn. Like I'd stick if I didn't let go." He rubbed his palms like they still hurt. We both joked because that's what you do around graves and tents. I said maybe the mower had a conscience, maybe it didn't want to mulch the plastic flowers. He said maybe the radios were picking up some preacher across the highway telling folks to repent. I was going to mention the funerals, but thought better of it. You don't do gallows humor when families can hear. The third time changed things. It was a Wednesday with a wind that made the flags on veteran graves crack hard. We'd had a heat advisory all week, the kind that bakes the scent of cut grass into your clothes. Rios dismissed me early to set the canopy at the infant section. Lance volunteered to finish the south lawn because he liked riding the zero turn at dusk. Said he could watch the bats while he cut. We all knew that section. It's where the oldest stones lean and the live oak's roots have lifted the earth like ribs. You go slow or you scalp the ground. I was folding chairs into the truck when Lance's mower went quiet again. I didn't look up. It had become a joke. Then I realized the silence wasn't just from the mower. Our radios had gone silent too. It's hard to describe that absence if you've never had a radio glued to your hip for hours. There's always a breath of static. Now there was nothing, even so I heard the voice. I heard it not in my ear but in the radio itself, like it hovered a foot away. "Stop the machine," it said. "Now. Now." A second later, Lance yelled something that never made it into the radio because he was already off the seat and moving. The mower coasted forward a few feet and then, with no one guiding it, sank nose first into a hole that had not been a hole 5 seconds prior. The front wheels dropped, the deck pitched, and the thing hung there like a fish caught on a hook. Rios and I ran. Doug was closest and got there first. A sprinkler main had blown under the turf. It had sagged and then given way, turned the soil into a muddy cavity. If Lance hadn't gotten off, that deck would have dug in and flipped the machine. I saw the skid marks, short and ugly like someone had stomped brakes. I saw the green-black shine of water under the grass. I saw Lance on his knees, hands still in the air like he was holding the bars. He kept saying, "I didn't touch it. I didn't touch it." It told me to stop. Rios looked like he wanted to be mad because a broken sprinkler on a hot week is a nightmare, but he kept it in. He clapped Lance's shoulder and said, "Good call." He told Doug to get the backhoe and a chain. He told me to shut the water at the pump house. The pump house is a little brick thing near the maintenance shed. Lock's old, the kind that could be picked with a paperclip if you were bored. I killed the valve. When I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the little window. For a second, it looked like there were two of me. It was just the double-pane glass heat shimmer. My brain's tired. I told myself that out loud because hearing your own voice makes your thoughts feel less crazy. We got the mower out with minimal damage. The broken main was patched by a plumber the next day. If the story ended there, you'd say it was luck. Maybe that's what it was. The thing with the voice didn't stop. It got smarter. The days after the pipe break, I started noticing how the radio would come alive when we were near certain plots. It wasn't random. The worst spot was the south lawn near the oak where Lance had stopped the first time, by an old headstone that had sunk so far the name was a guess. The stone next to it had a newer bronze plaque, one of those flat markers families buy when the old one is beyond repair. The plaque read Marshall Mark Benton, 1951-1983. Beloved husband, father, friend. The bronze had a faint mower scar across the corner, like someone had tapped it with a blade and then buffed it out. Faye told me later, the way office people always know the stories, that Benton had been a groundskeeper who died in an accident with a mower, right there on the south lawn. It was before she started, but Rios had been a teenage part-timer then. She said he never talks about it. I told Lance what she said because he'd asked. He got quiet in that way he does when his brain is 2 seconds away from spiraling. That model in the picture in the office, and he said, the one from the 80s, the big green deck. It looks like the same kind I ride. I told him most mowers look the same from a distance. That weekend, we had a double service, one in the morning for a teacher, one in the afternoon for a guy who'd been in a motorcycle club. Morning services are easy. People cry more, but they leave earlier. The afternoon ones stretch into evening. The bikers were polite. They lined their bikes up on the lane like parade horses and stood with their hands in their pockets. Wind moved the tent fabric. A storm sat to the north but never came. During the second service, Hector, the night guard, rolled in early to check the gates and lights. He likes to say he hates the place, but he takes pride in walking the lanes and making sure nobody sneaks in to do stupid TikTok stuff. He stopped by the shed where I was stacking chairs and said, "You guys on channel 2? "Always," I said. He lifted his radio. "Something keeps pushing my channel to 2. Bad switch?" "Feels like fingers," he said and grinned so I'd take it as a joke. But his eyes were narrow, like he was measuring whether to believe his mouth. When the mourners left, the sky had gone purple on the horizon. Doug parked the backhoe. Lance offered to stay a little late to blow clippings off the paths with the backpack blower because the wind had pushed everything into tidy piles. Rios shrugged and said, "If you want the overtime and Hector's okay with it." Hector said he'd be walking the perimeter if we needed him. He flipped on the floodlights by the maintenance shed, and one of them popped and died the second it warmed. The glass blushing, the smell like burnt dust. So it was me and Lance. The sound of the blower like a bee trapped in a bottle, and the smell of cut grass and gasoline mixing into something that'll live in my head until I die. I finished the west path and waved across the lawn to let Lance know I was heading toward the infant section. He nodded and throttled up. He had earbuds in, but one hung loose because Rios had a rule. One ear open always. If a family walks up with a question, you don't make them tap you like you're a teenager. You hear them coming. 15 minutes in, my radio said my name, not a call. Not Rios's clipped Evan copy. It said my name the way my grandmother used to say it, the syllables soft, like I'd been playing in dirt and she didn't want to scare the bird near the porch. "Evan," it said. Not urgent, familiar. Then, "Stop the machine." I turned in a circle so fast I made myself dizzy. The path was empty. Lance was a white dot near the south lawn, blower pack glowing in the floodlight. I keyed my radio. "Rios, you on?" Static. Faye had already gone. Doug was in the back lot smoking his end-of-day cigarette where he thinks we can't see him. Hector was somewhere on the north side. "Evan," the radio said again. "Stop the machine." "I'm not on a machine," I said, and felt stupid immediately. I was talking to air. This is where someone reading wants me to say the voice laughed or turned into a growl. It didn't. It said, "Then tell him." A moment later, Lance's blower whined down to idle and went quiet. My radio clicked as Hector's voice cut in with a curse, then, "Did y'all hear that?" There was wind behind him, wind that wasn't in the trees around me. I started across the lawn, sticking to the lanes because walking across graves after dark feels like stepping on backs. Lance was standing in the south lawn facing the big oak, head cocked. The blower hung from his shoulders. One of his earbuds dangled. I said, "You good?" He didn't look at me. "There's a kid," he said. I heard a kid. The south section backs up to a chain-link fence and beyond that a drainage lot and then a field with scrub cattle. I scanned for movement. "Where?" "Right here." He tapped the space in front of him. There was nothing. Just turf we'd cut earlier and the dark hump of the oak roots under the sod. Crickets shrieked like they do when the temperature finally drops. Something clicked in the water line, settling. What did it say? I asked. Lance swallowed. He said he lost his shoe. He asked if I could help him find it. We stood there side by side like fools. Hector's flashlight beam swept along the fence line 100 yards away. I could hear Doug laughing at a text in the lot. The sky had that low orange glow you get from shopping centers. And then from Lance's radio, a whisper. Stop the machine. He flinched. I don't like that, he said. I don't like how it sounds like it knows me. I should have said, let's call it a night. I should have cracked a joke, told him the dead don't tether to radios, told him it was the CB from the truck stop. Instead I said, maybe it's warning you. About the sprinklers, about... I don't know. About what? He said. About that, I said and pointed. I didn't know what I was pointing at until I saw it myself. A depression near the oak, subtle as a shrug. The type of sag you only see if you're looking for it. The sprinkler main we'd fixed ran not far from there. Soil had settled where we'd backfilled. It wasn't a hole, not yet, but it could become one under a man's feet. We stepped back together like dancers. Lance exhaled a laugh that sounded like relief and fear mixed. He said, thanks, mister, to the air, because people from here talk polite even to voices you can't see. We backed away, and then the radio gave us something new. A sigh like wind over a microphone. Then, help me, not a command. Not stop. Help me. The syllables dragged like someone moving furniture across a floor. The hair along my arm stood up so sharply it hurt. We both looked at the Benton plaque because where else would you look? You go where the story is, even when you wish you wouldn't. The bronze had caught dew already. A moth hit my cheek and I slapped it away and felt ridiculous and very alive. Help me, the radio said again, but the second word was longer, stretched thin, and the voice frayed in the middle like tape. Then nothing. The static came back like the whoosh of AC in a car turned on too high. Hector's beam hit us. He called, y'all playing with me? The north gate walked itself open. I shut it and it snicked back. I thought I saw a kid run. Don't have time for that tonight. We told him about the depression, about the voice. Hector listened with that look he has when he thinks someone's pulling his leg, then glanced at the plaque, then at the tunnel of shadow under the oak. Rio says Benton bled out in minutes, Hector said. That's what he told me once drunk. It happened before they had these little radios. They had those big shoulder units that took 2 hands. He crawled. That's the story. He crawled toward the pump house like he thought he could shut off the water or something. He didn't make it. I thought it was a mower, I said. Yeah, Hector said. He tapped the side of his head. It was both. Sometimes an accident is 2 accidents that shake hands. A moth hit the floodlight and went black into the glass, and that little sound, thip, felt louder than it should. Lance swallowed. His Adam's apple jumped. Help me how? He asked the dark, because he was the kind of guy who couldn't leave a plea unanswered even if it came through a speaker. We didn't get an answer that night. We got wind. We got Hector checking the gate again and cussing at the hinges. We got Rios telling us to clock out and go home before the storm that never came. I slept badly. I dreamed of a hum, a mower's blade chewing air in a field of wet grass and a guy crawling with his cheek sliding on mud. The next day, I went to the office to ask Faye about records. She shrugged. It was before digital everything. She had a file with invoices and an OSHA sheet with lines blacked out and a photocopy of a photo of men in brown uniforms gathered around a spot on the south lawn that's just dirt in the picture. In the corner, a pump house window reflected the scene back at itself like a mistake. Why are you so invested? She asked. I didn't say it out loud, but the truth was I couldn't stop hearing help me. It had lodged behind my ears like water after a swim. Every time a fan kicked on, I thought it was whispering. We decided, me, Lance, and Hector, after he rolled in that evening, that we'd try something small. Not a seance, nothing dramatic, just respect and problem solving. We'd check the pump house at night. We'd listen to the radio there. We'd see if maybe the voice wanted what all stuck voices want, to be heard where it got stuck. We went after closing. Rios would have shut it down if he knew. He doesn't believe in messing with things you can't write a work order for. We brought flashlights and kept the radios on too. The pump house smelled like wet concrete and old iron, and the sweet mold that grows in places that never fully dry. There's a tool rack on the wall. A rusted wrench sits at the back of it that none of us use because it's too big for the current valves. I've always wondered why no one tossed it. Tradition, probably. Or laziness. Hector stood with his back to the door because he has cop friends and they teach each other this stance. Lance looked at the gauge even though he doesn't know what it means. I put my hand on the metal housing of the control box and felt a tremor that wasn't electricity. It was my pulse in my palm, or that's what I told myself. We stood like that for a minute. The radios hissed. The building settled. Something scuttled in the roof, little claws on wood. Then the air thinned in the room the way it does before an AC clicks on, and my radio scratched like someone dragged a finger across a cheap microphone. "Help me," it said. Not stretched this time, flat, tired, Lance whispered, "How?" There was a pause. And then, soft as breath through a screen door, "Shut it down." Hector said, "We can't. It's on a timer now. If you kill it here, it'll throw an alert and Faye will—" My radio cut him off. "The key," it said. And my stomach did a thing I don't like to talk about. Because nobody said anything about a key. The pump house door has an old brass key stuck in the frame on a nail. It's been there since before Rio's, probably for a padlock that is gone now. It's not used. It's decoration. Lance reached toward it like something had hooked him. I grabbed his wrist. "Hold up." He looked at me like I'd slapped him. His pupils were pin dots in the flashlight. "He needs it," he said. "For what?" "So it stops," he said, and I didn't think he meant water. We argued without moving our mouths. Hector snapped, "Both of you stop." He took the key off the nail and handed it to me. "If we're going to be idiots, you be the one holding the idiot stick." The key was heavier than it looked. Warm from the wall, which made no sense. I held it, and my radio went quiet in a way that felt like someone holding their breath. We stood in that holding pattern for I don't know how long. The bug in the roof finished whatever it was doing and settled. Lance cleared his throat, and then the far floodlight outside popped and died. The room stuttered darker like the walls had leaned closer. The radios all barked at once with a sound like a crowd inhaling. Over it, a voice, not whispering, said, "Stop the machine," like a father stepping into a driveway and putting his hand on the hood of a car. "Okay," I said without meaning to. I put the key on the pump handle because that's what you do when someone asks for a key, and you don't know what lock they mean. It lay there shining like a dropped coin. We waited. Nothing happened except the sense that something had accepted a thing it had been handed. We left the key there. We walked out. Hector locked the door because habits are how you survive. We didn't say much. On the way back across the lawn, the radios stayed quiet. A wind moved low across the grass and made it tick like a tide of insects. The rest of that week was calm. The voice didn't come back. Lance stopped flinching every time his radio hissed. We worked, we joked. We cut and trimmed and picked up wind-blown wreaths. A family asked if we could plant a crepe myrtle near their mother's spot, and Rio said yes because he has a soft heart under the bark. On Saturday, just before noon, a storm finally came. Big one. You could watch it eat the edge of town like a curtain. We brought the tents down fast because you don't want metal poles up when lightning is looking for things to argue with. Hector wasn't on shift, but he texted me a picture of the north gate in the wind. Open and then shut and then open again. "Tie it," he wrote. "Feels like it wants to run." The power flickered. Faye went home because her kids' school called about early pickup. Rio said we'd ride it out. We sat in the maintenance shed. The kind of silence where men stare at the floor and pretend they're thinking about carburetors. Rain hit the tin roof like gravel. The radios kept hissing. Then, in the middle of a thunder crack that shook the walls, Lance's radio, only his, spoke. It said his name. He went pale. "Yeah?" he said. "South Lawn," the voice said, and for the first time it sounded young. Not a kid, young like a man who hasn't had his first back pain yet. It said, "Please." Rios opened his mouth and then shut it. He grabbed a poncho and tossed it at Lance and then one at me. "Stay on the lanes," he said. "If lightning gets too close, you drop and you crawl." We'll say we were checking ties on something. We ran under a sky that had no color. The rain made the markers into slick shoulders. Water boiled along the lanes like they were little creeks. The South Oak bent its head and shook water off like a dog. We stopped at Benton's plaque because where else would you? The ground there was holding, no sag, no new hole. Rain washed the bronze clean. "What?" Lance yelled into the storm. The radio answered with a sound I only understood after. It wasn't words. It was that cough a small two-stroke engine makes when it wants to run, and there's water in its throat. It was the jerk of a pull cord on a wet mower. Then, stop the machine, layered under it, and then a ripping noise like a bag tearing. Something across the lawn tipped. "Not near us," near the pump house. A black shape shifted at the base of the door like someone had dropped a shadow. Lightning hit the field beyond the fence and left a ghost of light on my eyeballs. When it cleared, I saw the pump house door was open, and the key was missing from the handle where we'd left it. We sloshed there. The door hadn't been forced. The lock was old but not broken. Inside, the wrench on the wall hung crooked like someone had brushed it. The valve lever sat at an angle it shouldn't have. Not off, not on. Like a hand had slipped. Great, Rio said behind us. He'd followed even though his knee hates mud. Now we get to explain a water bill. The water pressure steadied with a shudder and the rain's noise swallowed everything else. My radio stayed quiet. Lance's did too. We closed the door and wedged it with a cinder block because that's what you do when something moves and you want to feel like you made it harder. We stood in the rain until we were cold under our shirts. The storm passed. The power returned. The floodlight that had popped was dead. Glass smoked. We put the place back together because cemeteries are always half falling apart and half being fixed. That night my dreams were machine noise and wet tires. Sunday was clear. The families came in their good clothes and placed flowers. A kid chased a bubble between stones and his mother told him to be respectful, and he looked at her like he didn't know how to hold those two ideas at once. I looked at Benton's spot and felt nothing but the normal hum of being alive in a place full of names. I wish I could leave you there. 2 days later, Hector didn't show for his shift. He texted that his truck had died and he was waiting on a jump. Rio said he'd swing the gates at close because his wife was mad about something and he didn't want to go home early anyway. The evening light made the west side glow like a painting. Lance was blowing clippings again because he prefers the hour when the cemetery is empty and the air drops 2 degrees. I was in the shed putting fuel cans in order when my radio said, "Evan." It said it like someone had been standing just outside the door long enough to hear me breathing. "South lawn." "No," I said out loud to plastic and air. "No more of that." "South," it said, and then the click-click of a button being held too long like a nervous thumb. I stepped to the door and looked. Lance was a small figure moving along the lane, blower whining. The pump house sat to my left, its brick face dumb and blind. The floodlight above us buzzed like a bee. "Stop the machine," the radio said, soft as ever, and without knowing why, I took off running, because it said it in that way that makes your stomach fall through your shoes. When I got near the oak, I saw why. A man was standing under it. I could pretend I saw something else, something like a trick of shade. But it was a man in a dark uniform that didn't fit any delivery company I knew. He was turned half away and I didn't see his face. He had one hand out like he was telling schoolchildren to halt at a curb. Lance couldn't see him because the blower's snout was pointed down, and he was focused on where the leaves pooled near the root bulge. The man's hand didn't move. The voice in the radio said, "Stop the machine." And I finally understood it wasn't only about mowers. It was about anything with a motor and momentum. It was about bodies carried forward by habit, he yelled. Lance lifted his head. He saw me and then he saw something else I couldn't because his face did a thing I'd never seen it do. Lines smoothing and then collapsing like he'd been given a math problem that had a wrong number. He stopped. The blower died on his back. The man under the oak dropped his hand. And in the quiet, in the gap after motion stops, we heard it. A car on the frontage road screamed as its driver fought water still pooled in the lane from the storm. The tires spun. The car fishtailed. It didn't come through our gate. The chain held, but I watched it plow the curb like it wanted to. The driver overcorrected and by some geometry I couldn't map, missed the fence by inches and kept going, taillights wobbling away. If Lance had taken 2 more steps, if he'd been in the lane instead of on the grass, if he hadn't stopped, maybe nothing would have changed. Maybe everything. The weird thing about almost accidents is you only measure them with the rulers in your own head. We stood there a long time. The man under the oak wasn't there when I looked again. The radio was quiet. The pump house sat and listened. Rios called over the radio, voice normal, asking if we were done so he could lock up. It was the most beautiful, boring sound I'd ever heard. I don't work there anymore. That's partly because of what happened the next week, which wasn't dramatic, so it won't sound like enough to quit over. I was trimming near the infant section and my radio, which I had turned off, spoke anyway. I checked the switch. It was off. It said my name like my grandmother, and then, clearest yet, it said thank you, and then, help me. It is awful to be thanked by something you can't see. It is worse to be asked for help and know you can't give the kind that counts. I finished the row. I went to the office and told Faye I had a family thing out of state. I boxed my gloves and the earmuffs with my sweat in the foam and the clear safety glasses that never fit right. Rios shook my hand like he knew why but wouldn't make me say it. Lance looked at me too long and then nodded like he was deciding to stay long enough to make sure someone else wouldn't have to hear that voice alone. The last thing I did was walk to the pump house. The key was back on the nail. I don't know who put it there. Maybe Hector. Maybe Rios. Maybe it climbed. I looked in the little window and saw my face and a second face layered over it that was mine and not mine, depending on how I bent. I told the glass, "You can stop now." I said it like a prayer and like I was telling a toddler we were done with the park for today. That night at home after midnight, the neighbor's kid rode his dirt bike up and down the easement because his parents don't say no and our fence does nothing for sound. I woke to the hum of a small engine, and in the 2 seconds between sleep and wake I reached for my belt to turn my radio down. My hand closed on nothing. The room was still. The bike's noise Dopplered away. And then in the quiet of my own house, from the dark place where my mind stores all the engines I've ever stood near, came a whisper like wind over a microphone. "Stop the machine," it said. I lay there and breathed until my ribs stopped trying to run. I don't know if it meant the bike or my anxiety winding up, or the part of me that counts seconds by noise. I don't know if it meant me. If you go to Greenvale, you won't see anything but oaks and stones and water lines that work most days. If you hear a voice on your radio, you can blame CB Bleed, a trucker with a weird channel, old wiring. If you're riding a mower and the bars go cold, you can stand up and let it coast. If you're holding a key and you feel it warm like a hand, you can put it down and step back. And if you hear "Help me, I'm sorry," you will do what you do. You will stop or keep going. You will never know which kind of accident is waiting for which kind of decision. Sometimes at night when the AC kicks on and the duct in my hallway clicks like a switch, I say "okay" out loud to nobody. It feels ridiculous every time, but I sleep easier when I say it. Because maybe that's all any of it was. Someone asking permission for things to stop. Or someone warning us when momentum is about to carry us over a place that looks solid until it isn't. Either way, if you ever find yourself mowing near a bronze plaque with a faint scar and a name from 1983, don't be a hero. Don't be a skeptic either. Be exactly the kind of person who believes in both pipes and ghosts. Keep one earbud out, listen. And if a voice you don't recognize says, "Stop the machine," do it. Worst case, you look silly for a second. Best case, you don't end up a story whispered through somebody else's earpiece. I work for the council in a small town in the south of England, and before anyone says this sounds like something out of a movie, I swear I'm telling it exactly as it happened. My job title is unglamorous, maintenance and security for St. Mary's Burial Ground. It's a Victorian cemetery on the edge of town, bordered by a low flint wall and a line of old oaks that drop acorns like buckshot in autumn. I'm the one who unlocks the gates at sunrise, walks the grounds, notes leaning stones and broken vases, clears brambles, and sometimes chases teenagers who think tombstones are props for TikTok. I also sit in a prefab office by the maintenance shed with a kettle that takes too long to boil. Most days are ordinary, slow, and kind of quiet in a way that makes you check your phone just to hear a sound. In March this year, we started a renovation project. The council got a grant to make the older half of St. Mary's safer and more accessible. Subsidence had tilted rows of stones at odd angles. The idea was to lift some of the heavier slabs, check the ground beneath, put in supports, and re-level everything. There was a whole plan, risk assessments, archaeologists on call, and a long list of names you could feel staring back at you when you read them on the map. The day in question was cold and bright. I remember because my breath hung in front of me, and the sunlight came through the bare oak branches and stripes. We'd set up barriers and signs. My manager, Alan, stood with a clipboard like he always does. He's good at keeping the press out and the paperwork tidy. We also had an archaeologist from the county museum on site. A woman named Maya. She was small, late 30s maybe, with hair jammed into a bun and a habit of touching every stone like it might speak if she was gentle enough. Plot C row 7, Alan said, tapping the map with his pen. Elizabeth Row, interred 1874. Slabs sunk about 6 inches one side. We reached it as a crew moved the portable hoist into place. The stone wasn't huge, maybe 1.5 meters by 1. It had that milky lichen overtaking the edges, and the name was barely legible until Maya brushed the letters with a soft brush. "Row," she said, Elizabeth, beloved wife, and looks like the rest is lost. She glanced up at me. We'll take photographs. You've got the coffin listed? Standard Victorian, I said. Wood, screws still in. We lifted the slab with slings and a slow pull from the hoist. The earth beneath was compacted and dark, the way it gets when it's been pressed down a long time. There's a sensible part of your brain that says, it's a box in the ground. Nothing more. Still, when you first see a coffin, even after years working here, you feel yourself straighten up. The shape was there, long and tapered, lid intact. The screws were in place, neat little circles along the edge. No sign of disturbance, no gaps, right, Alan said, trying for brisk. We're moving at 6 feet to the new support line. Gentle as you like. 2 of the crew slid straps under the coffin. It wasn't easy. The soil clings. I watched the straps tighten and the box rise an inch, then 2. The winch whined. The men adjusted their balance. I expected the weight you always feel. That heavy, solid drag like lifting a wet log. Light, one of the lads said. He frowned, regripping. Feels light for size? Rot, Alan said. Would lose his mass. Leave the commentary, please. We set the coffin on a trestle to clean under it. Maya knelt at the side, eyes level with the seam of the lid. These screws, she said quietly. Look at the slots, I leaned in. The slots were packed with old dirt and something like rust, except the metal looked, new isn't the word. It looked as if the screwdriver marks were crisp, not chewed like you see when someone's tried to open something after a century in the ground. The heads were flush, uniform, and the varnish on the wood under the screws, and there was varnish, still showed a faint shine in a few sheltered spots. Could be better preserved soil here, Alan said. Clay pocket, airless, it happens. Maya said and didn't sound convinced. We had to open it. That's part of procedure when you move anything that might collapse later. You check the condition, you reinforce if needed. I signed the form. Alan countersigned. Maya set her camera ready. One of the crew, Kev, took the manual screwdriver rather than the drill because you always start slow with old things. The first screw came out with an almost friendly turn, like it had been waiting. No squeal, no tear of old wood. Just a clean pop and a thread that gleamed. Kev glanced at me. You sure this is 1874? He said. Records say so, I said. He removed all 12. We lifted the lid together. It didn't stick. It just rose, and a smell rolled out that I can't describe well because it wasn't rot. It was cold and faint and a little like laundry that hasn't dried right. I know how that sounds. Everyone stepped back out of habit, expecting something worse. The inside of the lid had a bloom of moisture across it, a pearly haze of condensation that caught the low sun. And the casket itself, the space where a person should have been, was empty. Not empty like dirt had fallen in or the body had collapsed to nothing. Empty like the space had been molded for a body and then never used. The silk lining, unyellowed with age, lay smooth, no sag where weight had been. There were faint ridges where the shoulders would be, the headrest, the little pleats along the side. It all looked indecently fresh for something under the ground for 150 years. No bones, no dust, nothing. Right, Alan said after a moment too long. Right, so we make a note. He said it like if he didn't, we'd find we'd said nothing out loud at all. Maya leaned close and raised her camera. The lens fogged immediately. She swore softly, wiped it on her scarf, tried again. Fog. She changed lenses. Fog. She put the camera down, held her hand just above the interior silk, not touching. It's cold, she said, but not cold like outside. Cold like breathing. Feel it. I bent closer and felt that same sense of cool you get when someone has just exhaled on a window pane. A whisper of damp air touched my face and was gone. I looked for a source. There was none. The wood was intact. The seam of the lid had sealed tight. The screws had been sound. There were no breaks or burrows. You get foxes sometimes and rats and things you don't name when visitors are around. But there was nothing. The coffin had the proper weight of age when you put a hand on it, solid under the varnish, and yet it had felt light when we lifted it. Close it, Alan said, more sharply than he needed to. We'll consult the parish register. Could be a documentation error. Could have been an empty coffin ordered by mistake. We'll find out. We put the lid back. Kev replaced the screws. They bit neatly, like they had every reason in the world to be there. Maya took photographs of everything else. I noted the time in the log, the weather, the names of those present. There's a way to deal with the strange by flattening it into lines and boxes and signatures. That should have been the end. We moved the coffin the 6 feet. lowered it carefully onto new supports, and set the slab back. The crew broke for tea. The sky turned the kind of gray that means rain by evening. Everyone had some half-formed theory. Premature burials and safety coffins came up. God knows the Victorians had their fears. Someone suggested body snatchers, and Maya shut that down with dates and the fact that there had been no tamper marks. You don't open a coffin under a fixed slab without leaving something. By the afternoon, it felt like an odd story to tell at the pub if anyone there still listened to you. Maya went back to the museum with her photos. Alan went to the council office to draft emails that would say as little as possible. I waited for the groundsman who does the late shift to relieve me. I was halfway through a crossword when my handset crackled. "Security to main gate," a voice said. "You got a delivery." "I wasn't told," I replied. "Not a package," the voice said. "A person." At the gate stood a thin man in a tweed coat, a decade out of fashion, and a priest's collar under it. He held his hat in both hands like he was about to ask for a favor. He introduced himself as Father Connolly from St. Mary's proper, the church attached to the burial ground, though I'd never seen him. "Our usual contact is a younger vicar who likes committees. I heard you were working," he said. "Thought I might come and say a prayer over any disturbed resting places. It's an old courtesy. You heard from who?" He tilted his head toward the oaks. "From those who keep me informed." If anyone else had said that, I'd have written it off as a joke. With him, it sounded like sincerity worn thin by years. I took him to the area we'd been in. He walked with care, tipping his head to read the names on the stones as if the dead might be offended to be walked past with less. When we reached Elizabeth Rowe's stone, he stood and breathed out, and his breath hung there, and I felt it match something I'd felt earlier and didn't want to name. He took a little bottle from his pocket, shook holy water onto the slab, and murmured a prayer that was more rhythm than words. Finally, he drew a small silver bell from his coat and held it in his palm. It wasn't church-polished. It had scratches and a few dents like it had been handled often. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. "A bell," I said, because sometimes a question doesn't want an answer that clever. They used to add bells to coffins, safety measure. Tubes to the surface and a cord to ring. The fear of being buried alive never quite leaves a place, even when you tell yourself it's a medical impossibility. St. Mary's had a handful. One was paid for by a woman named Rowe. "Elizabeth?" He blinked, and something passed across his face like a shadow. "Mrs. Rowe paid for a bell, yes, but it was her child who wore the cord. The fever was bad that winter. The bell rope ran through a pipe to a small frame they set above the grave. There are letters in the parish chest that speak of a ring at night that no one could find. That small frame kept being moved even when it was chained. Old men swear and old men forget what they swear to. Records say the bell was removed when the fittings came loose. The tube rotted. The ground swallowed the rest. "What are you saying, Father?" He set the bell down on the slab where it looked wrong and right at the same time. "I'm saying that the past is a room with more than one door. Sometimes we open the one we can see and another somewhere else opens too. I can't tell you that made sense to me then. It doesn't fully make sense now." He left after that as quietly as he had come. I put the bell back into his hand when he reached for it, though I had the urge to keep it, like keeping it would pin something in place. That night the cameras played games. We don't have many, just 4 at the gates and 2 on the main path. At 11:30, the path cameras cut to static and a thin sound like wind went through the speaker, even though the night outside was still. The gate camera showed the ironwork fog over as if someone had breathed on it. You know the way a cold car window fogs in a flower shape around your mouth. It was like that, blooming and fading again. The motion sensor lights tripped twice. I went out both times and walked the perimeter. My torch picked up fox eyes in the hedge and then nothing. When I passed the row plot, I caught the faintest smell like damp linen. The following morning, Alan called. "Good news," he said. "Parish records confirm an administrative error. The entry for Mrs. Rowe is duplicated, and the original ledger indicates a transfer. She was moved to a family plot after her husband died. The coffin was left unused. There you are." "That doesn't explain the condensation," I said. "Old wood holds moisture," he said, and his voice had that schedule has to keep moving edge. We put the slab back and we move on. Later, Maya came by with printouts. "I've been thinking," she said. "Look at these." She spread photos of the screw heads, the threads, the interior lining. Her thumb tapped the shots where her lens had fogged. Condensation forms on the coldest surface. Why is the coldest surface the inside of the lid? Not the lining, not the metal fittings, the lid. Because of the sun, it was cold in the shade. And look at the pattern. Breath makes a certain shape. These are oval patches, always at the same distance. She met my eyes, like a person standing head and shoulders beneath the lid. It was empty, I said. I know it was. That afternoon, a group of school children came for one of those earnest history walks where we try to interest 9-year-olds in urns and cherubs. Their teacher asked in the office if there were any notable graves they could see. I gave them the safe list. A poet you wouldn't know, a sea captain with a grand anchor carved on his stone. I did not mention Elizabeth Rowe. Even so, the group stopped by her slab because children always find the one thing you'd like to go unnoticed. A small boy reached out and touched the stone. He snatched his hand back. "It's wet," he said. The slab in the weak sun should have been dry. It looked dry. I crouched and put my palm to it. The stone was warm on top from the morning light and cool below where the shade had reached. But there, just below the carved name, my fingers came away damp. A faint oval mark remained where my skin had been. When I lifted my hand, another oval slowly blossomed beside it, and I didn't put my hand there. We kept working. We had to. The ground doesn't care if you're unsettled. At night, the sound on the speaker came and went. Twice the radio crackled with a thin voice saying something I couldn't make out. The second time, I heard my name. Not my surname, my first name, the way my gran used to say it. I checked with the crew. No one had their radios on. I took the batteries out and put them back in. The voice didn't repeat. I told myself I was tired. Maya asked me to sit a late watch with her in the little brick chapel while she took some readings. The chapel isn't used for services now, just storage and the occasional rain shelter for me when I catch a downpour. We set up a thermohygrometer and a little handheld recorder because she'd asked for permission to document ambient sound. It wasn't ghost hunting. She hates that phrase. It was just sensible evidence collection for her report. We sat, the recorder's red light on, the hygrograph's needle lazy in the green. I poured tea from a flask. The chapel has that smell of dust warmed by old sun, wax, and the shadow of flowers from decades of funerals. Just after midnight, the needle dipped. Not a lot, but down. The recorder's little LED flickered like it had caught a low noise. I didn't hear anything. Then I did. Not a voice. A low breath out, long and careful. The way you exhale if you're trying not to fog the glass you're looking through. It came from the door, then from the far wall, then faintly from just over our heads. Are you feeling that? Maya whispered I was. A cool on the crown of my head. A touch like the air changes when someone stands behind you. I resisted turning around because there is a small part of the animal in you that knows when not to run. The recorder picked up nothing dramatic. Just a whir and a little scratch like cloth against wood. The needle dipped again and came back slowly as if reluctant. At 2 a.m, something tapped the chapel window. Once, twice, 3 times. I stood and walked to it. My torch showed the condensation pattern on the glass, 3 small ovals side by side, as if 3 fingertips had pressed there a second ago and pulled away. We didn't sleep. We sat until dawn glazed the walls pale. When we went out, the grass glistened with dew. A fox lay in the middle path, tail around itself, alert and unbothered, and then slid into the yew like it had been waiting for us to go by. The row slab looked ordinary, stone among stones. I could feel the place under my feet like the stage of a theater after the actors have gone, still warm from feet you didn't see. That week, the forklift scale started arguing with itself. We use a small one to move heavy stones without breaking our backs. You check the load so you're not making dumb mistakes. Twice when we moved slabs nearby, the digital readout jumped by exactly 50 kilograms for 5 seconds and then settled again. It did it only within 10 feet of the row plot. The third time Alan made a joke about ghosts having weight. The fourth time he stopped joking. Maya took a day at the archives. When she came back, she didn't bring a neat conclusion. She brought a photocopy of an 1874 burial entry, written in iron gall ink that had browned to the color of tea. It said what we already knew. Elizabeth Rowe, 36, interred March. There was also a note in a different hand, lighter, as if the writer had been unsure they should set the words down. It said, Child Rowe admitted to same vault November, bell removed December. Then faintly beneath in pencil, complaints of ringing at night. That's it, Maya said. No scandal. No removal order. No nice explanation. Just a woman, a child, and a bell that rang after it should have gone quiet. We could have left it there. But the weather turned and rain pushed in for days. On Friday, vandals slipped in at dusk and spray-painted an angel with a profanity that made the retired ladies who come to tend the war graves cry. I volunteered to stay over the weekend nights to keep an eye on things. It's not glorious, but there's a feeling you get when the place is your responsibility, like someone has to be present to witness a thing so it doesn't happen in the dark. The first night was just wet. The second was the worst weather since January. The wind came in hard, then dropped flat as if someone pressed a finger to the world and said quiet. Around 2, the radio clicked on by itself and hissed. I said my name. Nothing answered. I stood, stretched out the stiffness, and walked my route. The rain eased to a fine mist that filmed your coat and found your collar. I passed the row slab and paused without meaning to. The smell of damp linen rose sharp as if someone had just opened a cupboard. I knelt and laid my palm on the stone. It didn't feel like outside. It felt like pressing your hand against the other side of glass while someone did the same. The cold came through to my bones. The condensation pattern formed, not at my hand but at the top edge of the slab. A pale oval that grew, then shrank, then grew again. As regular as breathing. I took my hand away. The oval kept time. Then a second oval blossomed beside it, smaller, like a child might stand to one side and breathe to match. I said without meaning to, Elizabeth, because sometimes a name is a rope you throw into a dark well to see if anyone will tug back. The radio on my hip crackled. A woman's voice, very soft, said something that could have been, I'm here. Or it could have been a sigh and my fear filling in what I wanted to hear. The signal dropped. The ovals faded. I stood and the night came back all at once. The wind rose. The oaks sighed. I walked because standing still felt like choosing a side. I made it to the gate by the road before I saw the footprints. Bare feet, wet on the old flagstones, clear as prints made in a warm house when you come in from the garden after rain. They led from the direction of the row plot to the gate, and then through the bars, which made no sense. I unlocked the gate and swung it open. The prints continued in the lane, grew faint, and stopped at the old lich gate down the way, the little arched shelter where coffins used to pause before the service. The prints ended there, not with a smear or a jump or a turn. They just ended on the stone threshold like someone had stepped into a place that wasn't wet or wasn't here. By the time I returned to the office, my hands shook. I made tea I didn't drink. On the office window inside, 3 small ovals matured side by side, then a larger one above them and drifted away. The room smelled like cotton that never quite dries. I thought of the bell in the priest's pocket, of a child with a cord around a wrist. I sat until dawn because there was nothing else to do. The next morning, Alan asked if I had anything to report. I told him about the footprints. He wrote it down like it was an incident with a fox. Maya came later and listened without interrupting. Sometimes, she said finally, the record left on paper is thinner than the one left on stone. We never opened the coffin again. There was no reason the council would accept. We finished the work on that row. We put fresh gravel on the path. The school children came and went. The press never got wind. The older ladies who tend the flowers added a pot of white cyclamen to Elizabeth's slab without asking anyone. I asked Father Connolly when I ran into him in town if he'd heard the bell lately. He smiled without humor and told me he'd rather not say. You can decide that's the end. I wish it were. 2 weeks later, I left the cemetery at dusk. It had been a warm day for April, and the temperature dropped hard after sunset. I got in my car and the windscreen fogged right away. I turned the blowers on and rubbed a sleeve over the glass. The place you wipe always clears in a ragged patch first, an oval. In the first smear of clarity, there was writing. Not finger-traced and perfect, but the way letters appear when someone has written on the inside of a window, and the oils hold on to condensation longer. 3 letters, then a pause, then 3 again. Row, and under it, lighter, the suggestion of an E. The letters faded as the blowers worked. I sat for a good minute with my forehead on the steering wheel, because at some point you accept the world is going to be what it is and your opinion won't change it. At home that night, I took a hot shower to get the damp out of my bones. The bathroom mirror blurred. When I wiped it, a second oval formed at the edge of the glass, not quite where my hand had been. I stood there shivering as clean water ran down. You cannot call a priest to your flat without inviting every story you've ever laughed off to come and live in the corners. I went to bed. Around 3, that cold, dry laundry smell pushed into my half-sleep, and I woke with my mouth open like I'd been trying to speak in a dream I didn't want to understand. In May, a box arrived at the office with no return address. Inside was a small linen laundry tag, the kind with woven letters they stitched into clothing in the 19th century. The thread spelled E-Row in neat black. The card inside said in tight, careful handwriting, "Found under the lich gate during repairs. Thought it belonged with you." There was no signature. I showed it to Maya, who looked like someone had put a child into her arms who didn't belong to her, and asked her to decide what was right. We placed the tag in a little glassine envelope and logged it. It sits in the drawer where we keep the keys to the chapel and the spare fuses. Every time I open the drawer, the envelope sticks a little to the wood like it's acquired damp that won't dry. There's a version of this story I could tell where I draw a conclusion for you. I could say the coffin was a decoy. I could say Elizabeth Rowe never lay there at all. I could say the empty box held a gap that wants filling and that the living, when they come too close, provide the breath to briefly shape the absence. I could say the bell was a telephone that rang a very long time and someone finally answered. I could take Father Connolly's line about doors and say we opened one. But when I unlock the gates each morning and the oaks drop their acorns and the old stones lean, what I actually know is simpler and worse. Some things are recorded on paper, some are recorded in stone, and some are recorded in air, where breath goes and hangs and sometimes won't leave. If you are ever in a place like St. Mary's after dark and you feel the cold settle in a little different, like a careful exhale against your cheek, don't say no. Don't say yes either. Stand there and let the air be what it is. Then keep moving. Close the gate behind you. Check that you've still got your keys. On quiet mornings, I walk past Rose's slab and think about weight. Weigh a thing once and it tells you one number. Weigh it again and it tells you another. The men in high vis laugh and put it down to the scale. The foxes know better. They skirt that patch of gravel-wide path like water flowing around a stone. When the sun is low and the air is just right, you can see 2 ovals bloom on the top edge of the slab, close together, matching like someone taught a child to count time with their lungs. They fade if you move too close. They come back when you step away. We keep our records. We mow the grass. We write incident reports that don't quite say the thing. Elizabeth Rowe is still in the ledger. The coffin is still in the ground with screws intact and wood untouched. The bell, wherever it is quiet. But sometimes I wake before dawn and the window by my bed shows a pale oval in the gray. And I lie there holding still while the cold walks over my face. And I tell myself the truth the way you tell it to a child. Some coffins are full of air and breath and waiting. Some doors are open in the dark where we cannot see them. And some names once spoken aloud find their way to your glass and leave a little condensation where no breath has any right to be. I'm not sure how to start this without sounding dramatic, so I'll just tell it the way it happened. I used to work nights as a private security guard in Buenos Aires. The company rotated us through a few sites, but the one everyone either wanted or dreaded was La Recoleta Cemetery. If you've never been there, it's not like the cemeteries most people imagine. It's a tight little city of marble and glass, narrow alleys between family mausoleums, angels on rooftops, iron gates with delicate leaves. There are cats everywhere because the neighbors feed them. During the day, tourists come through with cameras and hushed voices following guides with little flags. At night, it's just the cats, the wind that moves without a reason, and whoever drew the short straw on the schedule. We did 12-hour shifts 7 to 7. The first month I got stuck on nights, I told myself to be practical about it. Cemeteries are only scary because we're taught to be scared of them. My supervisor, an old guy named Alvarez who'd been with the company so long he didn't bother with the uniform cap, said the same thing every time he handed me the logbook. Use your head, not your nerves. The living caused the trouble. That sounded wise. It also sounded like something you say to keep a kid from spooking. The team was always 2 people at night, 1 at the front gate and 1 on patrol. There was a little office inside the entrance with a bank of monitors. The cameras were old but decent. You could see most of the main walkways, a few of the courtyards, and some of the chapels that got vandalized years back before they improved the locks. The chapel that mattered to this story is a small one near the center. People call it the Chapel of Souls, though that's not its real name. It's stone and glass with a tall, narrow window on the front. You can see the altar through the glass if you stand at the right angle. My first night there, I worked with Miguel. He was a year older than me, but looked younger because he shaved clean every day and had this habit of grinning at things that weren't funny. He was a decent partner. We split the night into 2-hour rotations and crossed out our initials on the log every time we traded the chair. Nothing happened that night except a cat knocking over a trash bin and a couple of tourists who tried to slip back in after closing for the thrill of hanging with ghosts. We walked them to the gate and threatened to call the police. They apologized in English and scampered off. The second night, Lucia replaced Miguel because he had a cousin's wedding out in Lanús. She was serious. Former Army logistics, hair buzzed short under the cap. The kind of person who makes you speak a little better because she looks directly at you when you talk. She seemed to like the assignment. "It's quiet," she said, and then after a pause I didn't understand. Usually, just after 1 in the morning, the wind came up like it sometimes does there, curling down the long, straight avenues between the mausoleums so it whistles against the ironwork. Some of the older vaults have stained glass that rattles when the gusts hit just right. The sound bounces and you can't always tell where it's from. We were in the office then. I was eating a cold empanada and Lucia was watching the monitors. She tapped the screen for camera 8. "Look," she said, but not like she'd seen something crazy. More like she'd found an error in a spreadsheet. Camera 8 showed the Chapel of Souls. There was a figure in the window. A man tall, wearing black, hands clasped like he was praying. At first I thought it was a reflection, like a street light catching the glass and making a shape, but the angle was wrong. The window isn't reflective at night unless you're right up close. The figure wasn't in the glass. He was behind it inside. "The chapel is locked," Lucia said. "I checked it at 23:10. We watched for a few seconds and I kept waiting for something obvious to explain it. There's a tendency on nights like that to make excuses for what you're seeing, so you don't have to get up and prove you're wrong. Maybe it was a cutout someone left behind after a funeral. Maybe it was a coat on a stand. Maybe it was a trick of the IR on the camera. The figure didn't move. The wind pressed against the glass and the chapel's door, and down the alley a cat darted through, tail low. "We should walk it," Lucia said, already standing. We grabbed the heavy flashlights and the keys. The main walk toward the center runs under a canopy of branches you barely notice in daylight. At night they seem to lean down. The smell in Recoleta after midnight is old stone, damp dust, and sometimes flowers left on graves that have started to turn. Our boots clicked on the paving because you can't help walking a little faster when you're trying to look like you're not rushing. The Chapel of Souls sat quiet as always. Up close, the glass was darker, the interior only a little visible by the thin spill of light from a street lamp outside the cemetery wall. We both angled our lights toward the window. There was no one there. Empty aisle, simple altar, 6 wooden benches, brass holders with candles, none lit. "I saw him," I said, and I heard how childish it sounded. Lucia didn't tease me. She tested the handle. Locked. Then she stepped around to the side door, which the maintenance guys used sometimes. The deadbolt slid back with a loud clack. She nudged the door inward and we swept the beam across the floor, under benches, corners. Nothing. The air was cooler in there, like a basement. My light passed over the candle rack again and I noticed wax that looked too clean, too smooth, like it hadn't had dust settle on it yet. "Fresh," I said, and Lucia nodded. She bent closer to one of the candles. The wick was blackened, slightly bent as if pinched out. She didn't touch it. "No smell," she said. "Someone lit them and snuffed them." We locked up and went back to the office. By then it was a story you tell to fill silence. "Camera glitch," I said. "Or a cat set off the motion and the light made a shadow." Lucia shrugged, wrote in the log, 124 checked Chapel 8 secure. She didn't write what we saw because you don't write stuff like that if you plan to keep the assignment. You share it over coffee with the right people and you decide if they've earned the rest. When Miguel came back 2 nights later, I told him anyway. He laughed and asked if the man was cute. Then he got weirdly interested in the candles and whether I thought someone had been inside before us lighting them as a prank. The maintenance guys, he guessed. They like to spook new guards. I wanted to agree with him, but I'd met the maintenance guys and they were too tired for pranks. Midweek, after a day of rain, the night air turned crisp and clear. I had patrol for the first shift. Around midnight, I cut by the chapel and habit made me glance at the window. The tall man stood there again. Same posture, hands clasped, head tilted down, He looked like a priest a second before he says the words that change something inside you. I didn't freeze this time. I told myself it was a stunt and thought if I can catch him, I can settle this for good. I jogged around to the side door and keyed it, pushed in and swung my light up. Empty. I swept left to right, slow like they taught us. The tiny room behind the altar was locked from the inside and dusty. There was nowhere for a person to hide unless they lay flat under a bench, and the floor was clean. No scuffs, no dragged footprints. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stepped back into the main space and felt the temperature shift a degree colder, that thin layer of cold over the skin. The candles on the right were all newly lit, tiny blue hearts under the yellow flames. They flickered like they were running out of breath. I didn't light them. I stood there longer than I meant to, trying to work out if I could have missed someone. I took a step toward the candles, and all of them went out at the same time. Not like a draft, like a decision. I backed up, locked the door, and walked away without running, because running in a place like that proves something you don't want proven, even if only to yourself. When I reached the office, Miguel saw my face and put down his phone. "Hey," he said, grinning because he always grinned first. "You look like you owe me a story," I told him. He stared at the monitors for a second and then switched camera 8 to full screen. The window showed the same faint reflection of the path light in the dark inside. "Show me which candles," he said, serious for once. I pointed at the right-hand rack. He nodded like that confirmed something for him. "I've heard about that," he said quietly, as if we had an audience behind us. "From Victor, the guy who did nights before you. He said he kept seeing someone in that window, and when he went in, the candles were lit. He quit after a month. Went to do overnight deliveries. He says at least the trucks don't look back at you." We weren't supposed to talk about patterns. If you say something happens often enough, it starts to seem like part of the job, and then one of the thin lines that keep you steady at night gets erased. But after that, we watched camera 8 without admitting we were watching it. The figure didn't appear every night. That almost made it worse. If something shows up at the same time on the same nights, you can build a routine around it. If it's unpredictable, you start to lean toward the screens in ways you can feel in your neck and shoulders, and you jump at normal sounds. There were a couple of nights that month when tourists broke the lock on the back gate. There were teenagers who wanted to dare each other to touch a certain statue. There was an old drunk who tried to sleep under a marble overhang until the cat he'd been petting got bored and clawed him. The living caused the trouble, Alvarez would say, and he was right, except the last night I worked Recoleta, it started ordinary. I came in at 6:30, sun going low. The cats made their rounds. The last tour group shuffled out. A woman in a navy coat argued at the gate with our day guard about something with flowers. By 7, we were alone. Lucia was back on my shift that week. Her buzz cut had grown into a soft shadow, and she'd started bringing a thermos of coffee that tasted like chocolate. We made the plan for the night, and I took the first office stretch while she walked the perimeter. At 9:20, I glanced at the chapel feed and saw the man again, clear as a person standing in a window can be. A tall black shape, no face, hands together. I didn't call Lucia on the radio because I had this superstition that saying it out loud scared it off. I grabbed my flashlight and the keys and went myself. The air felt wrong immediately, different from the clean cool of a fall night. It had that flat quality you get in a church when everyone's holding their breath. When I turned down the chapel lane, the cats were all sitting, which is a weird thing to notice, but they were. Not grooming, not prowling. Sitting, like they were listening to someone explain a rule. I stopped 5 meters from the door and looked at the window. The figure wasn't there. My chest sank the way it does when you reach for a step in the dark and there isn't one. I still went around to the side, keyed the lock, and pushed in. The candles were lit again. Not all of them. 7 in a neat line along the second row. They cast the kind of moving shadows that make you imagine movement outside your field of view. There was an old brass stand with a glass of water on it near the altar. The water rippled, tiny concentric rings like when a subway goes under your street and you feel it in your coffee mug. "Hello," I said, because that's what you do when you watch a candle go out on its own. It isn't courage. It's a way to feel like you're not being rude in a place that has rules you didn't write. "The chapel is closed," I added, because that was my job. I stepped forward and picked up the small metal snuffer by the candles. It was cool in my hand. I lowered it over the first flame. I didn't snuff it. It snuffed itself just before the cone touched it, as if it had been waiting for a cue. The second candle went out as I turned to it. Then the third and fourth extinguished themselves, little streams of smoke climbing in the same direction toward the window. My scalp prickled so hard it felt like a different texture on my head. The door behind me clicked softly. Not closed, not open. Just a tiny movement in the latch, like fingers brushing it. I turned, and the air in that narrow aisle seemed to flex, the way heat does over asphalt, but without warmth. The glass in the front window hummed for 2 seconds, a thin high note. I haven't been able to describe it well since then. It was like a voice learning how to use a throat. The 7th candle guttered and went out. The glass hummed again. Then silence so complete it had a shape. I didn't run. I walked out and locked the door carefully and didn't look at the window as I passed. The cats were gone. I radioed Lucia and said we had a visitor in 8 and we needed to mark it. She answered immediately. On my way. Back in the office, the monitor for camera 8 flickered and then steadied. For a second, longer than a glitch, the figure filled the window frame. Not a smear, not a reflection. The shape of a man with a head bowed, hands together. Then the lights in the office went out. Not the whole cemetery, just us. The monitors popped and died. The desk lamp went dark. The little fan in the corner spun down. The radio crackled with a thin burst of static that sounded like someone trying to speak underwater. Then everything snapped back on. It might have been 3 seconds. It felt longer. The recording system saved the video, which is the only reason the next part matters outside my memory. After the power blinked, I rewound and played the last 2 minutes. Lucia came in while I had it paused on the figure in the window. She stood behind me, and for the first time since I met her, she touched my shoulder. Just 2 fingers there and gone, like she needed to prove I was physical. Keep playing, she said. I let it run. On the screen, the figure stood still. The flicker cut the image into frames, and for 3 of those frames, the camera adjusted exposure enough to catch more detail. A face not well defined, not a portrait or anything, but the suggestion of features. High cheekbones, mouth closed, eyes not looking out but toward something at the floor. Then the image went dark and the exposure jumped. And the window was empty, and the front lamp outside had dimmed like a cloud had crossed it. But the sky was clear that night. We both watched it twice without speaking. Then we looked at each other and both laughed, quick and ugly. I don't know if it was relief or the body's need to do something when there's nothing to do. We called Alvarez because that's what the book said. He answered like he'd been awake. We told him there was an intruder in 8. Probably a prank, probably nothing but the candles. He said he'd come over. He didn't say we were being silly. He didn't say the living caused the trouble. He just said to wait in the office and watch the doors. We waited. The clock laughed at us with its quiet ticks. It felt later than it was. When Alvarez arrived, his boot sounded loud in the entry. He sat down, didn't look at us, and watched the same clip. Then he pushed the chair back and said he wanted to see the chapel. I offered to go with him. He said no, which I chalked up to pride. Lucia handed him the keys anyway, and he left. The time on the office clock showed 10:04 when he walked out. 10:07 when the radio squawked with his voice, cool and measured, saying, "I'm at 8. Door is locked." 10:08 when he said, "Going inside now." After that, the radio made a soft sound like someone brushing the mic with their coat, and then nothing at all, not even static. We waited. Lucia is not someone who fidgets, but she tapped a rhythm out on the edge of the desk that I still know by heart. At 10:12, she said we should go find him. I agreed before the sentence was done. The walk to 8 was short and took forever. The cats were nowhere. The branch canopy above us looked like rib bones. When we turned into the chapel lane, we both stopped. The window glowed a little, like there were candles inside, more than I'd seen before. You don't get that much light out of 7 small flames. It had a warm tone that reminded me of kitchens. Alvarez was at the side door, key in the lock, body angled like he was shielding it. He didn't turn when we approached. "Sir?" Lucia said quietly. No answer. She touched his sleeve and he startled like he'd been asleep standing up. He turned and I saw immediately something had changed. He looked younger and older at the same time. Softened around the eyes, the lines in his forehead deeper. He cleared his throat. "You should see this," he said, voice rough. He left something. He pushed the door open and stepped back for us to enter first. That is not normal for him. The room was bright with candlelight. Every holder had a candle burning, neat rows of fire. On the altar, where the little brass stand and glass of water sat, was a photograph in a cheap frame. The glass had a crack across the corner. It showed a man who could have been the shadow. Hard to say. tall formal suit, hands clasped in front of him in the same posture. He stood by the chapel door with a cluster of family around him, all in black. A funeral photograph printed from a phone maybe, not professional. The date stamp at the bottom right corner had bled in the printing, but you could still make it out. It was from 3 months earlier. There was a folded paper under the frame. Alvarez didn't reach for it, I did. I unfolded it and held it so the candlelight could find it. The note was written in careful block letters like someone trying not to show their hand in the script. Please, it said. One more night with him. I looked at Lucia. She looked at Alvarez. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his badge and said nothing. The candles made a soft whispering sound you only hear when too many flames are in a small space, like they're telling each other a story. We don't know what this is, Lucia said finally, but we need to call the priest in the morning. That felt right. Recoleta has arrangements with local parishes. For now, she added, choosing each word, we log it. We leave it. We lock it. We stepped back. Alvarez took the photograph and the note and placed them on the bench instead of the altar. Family business, he said, more to himself. We locked the door. Back in the office, we wrote the log entry together, which made it feel official and impossible at the same time. 2221. Observed anomalous figure on cam 8. 2227 candles lit inside upon entry. 2234. Found photograph and note requesting one more night. Secured area will notify administration. We watched the monitors until the clock reached midnight. And then we watched some more because it felt like the kind of night that moved time around. Around 1, a woman in a gray coat came to the gate. That alone was strange. People don't show up after midnight unless they're drunk or stupid. And she was neither. She asked for me by name, which is a good way to get my attention in a job where most people don't care who you are. My name is Teresa, she said. Please, I know you're closed. I won't go in. I just wanted to ask if anyone found something I left. We stood there looking at each other while the cat circled her ankles like they were greeting an old friend. Lucia joined me. The woman clutched her coat closed, not like she was cold, but like she needed something to hold. I left a photo and a note, she said. In the little chapel. My husband. He was buried in July. He loved the night. He used to walk there after work and talk to his parents. I know that sounds silly. There was something about the way the light looked through that window at night. He said it was like the city was breathing. When he died, I felt like he didn't get a proper goodbye. It was all too quick. So I came every night for a week and stood outside and watched the window. Last night I thought I saw him standing there with his hands like he always did when he concentrated. I know how that sounds. I know. I left the note and the picture and asked for one more night with him. Her eyes were dry and her voice didn't shake. She'd passed crying and come out somewhere clear. Lucia told her we found the photo and the note and that the chapel was secure. She didn't lie to her and say no one had been inside. Alvarez came to the door, looked at Teresa and said, You should go home. It's late. We will be here. We will take care. He said it like he had a daughter who needed to hear it from him. She nodded and thanked us and walked away into the quiet streets without looking back. At 3, the figure returned to the window. This time it wasn't unexpected. It felt like the end of a conversation. He stood very still. The monitor showed a subtle change, the way infrared does when it tries to guess warmth. The candles wouldn't have made that much difference, not through stone and glass, but the screen washed a fraction lighter around the figure as if he had his own weather. We didn't go inside. That felt wrong, like interrupting a goodbye. At 3:17, the figure's head lifted the smallest amount. We all saw it. Alvarez's breath caught. On the radio, a hiss rose and fell, faint and rhythmic, like someone breathing very quietly near the mic. No voices, no words. The figure thinned, not like it walked away, but like the camera suddenly had to try harder to hold it. Then the front light outside the chapel flared and dimmed, and when it settled, the window showed the empty aisle again. We let another hour pass. No one said to. We just did. At 4:30, we walked to the chapel. The side door opened with less effort than usual, like the bolt and frame had been reintroduced. Inside, every candle had burned to the same height, a precise little plateau with a dark center. The photograph and note were gone. Alvarez patted his pocket and shook his head. He hadn't taken them. I searched the benches, the floor, empty. On the altar where the glass of water had been, there was a faint ring. No water. In the dust around the base of the stand, 3 narrow lines traced a curve. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. They were fingerprints. Someone had set their hand there and moved it slowly, like saying goodbye to a table before you leave a house. We locked up. The sky over the walls had that color it gets just before dawn when the city sighs and makes room for another day. The cats appeared again, casual as normal. People always say animals know. Maybe they do. Maybe they just appreciate quiet where there is usually noise. At 7, when the day staff arrived, we gave the report to the administrator and said we would like the parish priest to bless the chapel. He nodded before we finished. He said he'd call Teresa because he knew who she was. We didn't tell him about the figure in the window. I think he knew anyway. Some people are fluent in things you can't put on paper. I asked to be rotated off Recoleta after that. I told myself it wasn't fear. It was respect, which is just a nicer word for fear when you want to sleep. The company put me on a museum for a while, then a bank construction site where the only thing moving after midnight is a tarp flapping against a fence. 2 months later, Miguel texted me a photo at 2:11 a.m. It was a grainy shot of camera 8. The window looked ordinary, dark, the aisle behind it empty. "Quiet tonight," he wrote. "Your friend must have gotten his night." I stared at the picture until my eyes watered, and then I put my phone face down and listened to the wind pushing against the aluminum siding of the construction trailer. I still dream about the chapel window sometimes. In the dream, I'm standing outside with the cats and I can see my reflection in the glass mixed with the aisle and the candles, and the city behind me. There's a figure in there, not the same man, someone the height and shape of me, head bowed like I'm reading a note I wrote in letters too square to be mine. I always wake before the face lifts. On those mornings, I make coffee and don't look at my phone until there's light. The living cause the trouble, Alvarez says. Most days I believe him. On other days, I think trouble is just how we describe being noticed by something that was here before us and will be here after, polite enough to give us one more night when we ask the right way. If you go to La Recoleta during the day, you won't see anything. You'll take pictures of angels and touch smooth marble and maybe find the cats lounging in the shade. If you go at night, which you shouldn't, you'll see yourself in the glass more than anything. That's the honest version. There's no screaming, no doors slamming, only locked gates, quiet candles, a hum of glass that is almost a voice, and the feeling that if you raised your hand and pressed it to the altar, someone kind would move their fingers through the dust beside yours, so neither of you had to be the first to let go. I'm not the kind of person who tells ghost stories. I'm a caretaker. My job is bolts, hinges, weeds, and weather. I fix what's broken and lock what needs locking. That's it. But what happened at Greyfriars this past spring took me from, I don't believe in anything, to, I check every shadow as if it's waiting to breathe. If you've been on one of the late tours, you might have heard a watered-down version of it by now, passed mouth to mouth like gossip. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened the way I lived it, and you can decide what you think. My name is Robert McNeil. Everyone calls me Rob. I'm the night caretaker at Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh. It looks exactly like every moody postcard you've ever seen. Tilted stones, black iron, and a skyline that pretends the modern city doesn't exist after sundown. I clock in before the last tour leaves, do a sweep, and make sure the gates, especially the one into the Covenanters' prison, are locked. The prison is basically a long rectangular section walled in at the back of the yard, full of tight rows of old enclosures and stones. It has a history that makes people talk too fast and laugh at nothing. Most nights it's just wet grass and silence. The day it started was a storm night in late March. A cold one, the kind that makes the rain feel like thrown needles. My supervisor, Maggie, asked me to stay a bit later because a section of fence along the east wall had loosened in the wind, the part where tourists already leaned too hard to take pictures of the skyline. Easy job, shore it up, switch out a bracket, check the footing. She left me a thermos of tea and one of those church biscuits no one likes, but everyone eats anyway. We joked about me deserving hazard pay for working in a Scottish drizzle. She locked the main gates at 10 and told me to buzz her if I needed anything. We both knew I wouldn't. I've done this for 6 years. The rain came and went like curtains being pulled across the sky. I worked by headlamp, the beam flicking over wet stone and the slick shine of names I've learned unconsciously by looking at them every night. When I took a break and the world went quiet for a second, I noticed the sound. It wasn't wind. It wasn't the distant traffic thrum or the click of the lamp head shifting against my cap. It was humming. If you've ever had a song stuck in your head, something simple like a lullaby, You know the way it loops on the edge of your hearing. Close, but not quite there. That's what this was, except it was coming from the direction of the Covenanters' prison. A soft, steady melody, almost like someone trying to soothe a baby that wasn't theirs. I stood still in the rain, listening. You think you'll be brave in those moments. I'm not dramatic. I have keys and a radio and a headlamp. I'm a grown man standing in the rain in a graveyard I know better than my own street. But that sound raised something in me, like standing on an unseen step. My first thought was that one of the tour companies had snuck in a nighttime event without notice. It's happened once or twice. Students hopping the low wall for a dare. The prison is locked. We keep it locked. I headed that way. The path into the Covenanters' prison is familiar, like the way to your bathroom in the dark. The gate is tall and black with 2 padlocks we keep more for show than anything. I tried both. They were shut and cold the way metal gets when it hasn't been touched in hours. The humming was inside, no question. It was stronger now, threading the wet air, a small melody that never quite finished its line before beginning again. Hello? I called, because that's what you do. We're closed. My voice sounded bigger than me. The sound went on. I knew it was stupid, but I turned my headlamp off to listen better. You always think turning off the light will make your ears work harder. It did. But it also made the rain look like it was falling out of nothing. I pressed my ear to the bars and felt the cold sink through my cap. The tune was clearer, 4 or 5 notes rising and falling like a rocking chair. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't sad either. It was practical and soft, like someone doing a job. The light from the headlamp, still strapped to my forehead, caught the curve of the nearest stone inside the prison when I angled it just right. There was nothing moving. No shape, no torchlight, no idiot teenagers daring each other to laugh. Just that humming. I called Maggie. She answered on the second ring, voice warm and curious. I told her I was hearing something inside the prison. She's sensible. She told me to stay put, keep my light on, and if I thought someone was inside, she'd call Constable Alistair, who does the night loop around the area. I said yes. We both said it was probably some trick of the acoustics. The wind can do odd things with sound in the yard. She said to wait. I said I would, and then I stayed there, watching the dark shape of the locked gate like it might choose to open. The humming stopped so suddenly it made me sway. The kind of quiet that follows is the loudest sound you'll ever hear. I stood there with the rain ticking on my jacket and felt childish. I told myself it was nothing and that if someone came in, I'd see footprints by morning. The ground inside the prison holds prints like a soft memory. I walked away along the main path, kept my headlamp low, and finished the fence job with stiff hands. Alistair came through about 30 minutes later. His patrol car lights off, moving slow. Big guy, sandy hair, always looks like he just came in from a long swim. Calm and a little tired. I waved him over and we checked the locks together. He's the sort who doesn't laugh at you for saying you heard something. We both stood at the gate for a minute like 2 kids looking into the neighbor's garden, and nothing happened. He asked me what the tune sounded like. I hummed my best guess. We both agreed it was weird. We both agreed there was nothing to be done at nearly midnight in the rain. He offered me a lift to the bus stop since I'd stayed late. I almost said yes, but the truth is I don't like leaving the yard with a job in the air. You'll say that was the first mistake, and maybe it was. I told him I'd lock up and see him soon. He nodded, said he'd circle the block twice, and rolled away with that slow tire hiss you get on wet stone. I slept badly. I dreamed of a house with no rooms, just hallways lined with doors that didn't open. In the morning, I came back early because, this will sound foolish, I wanted to check the ground inside the prison for footprints. I let myself in through the main gate and followed the path with a weird fluttery feeling behind my ribs, like when you know you left the stove on. The sky had that bright gray look Edinburgh does so well, everything the color of a wet spoon. I walked straight to the prison. Both padlocks were as I'd left them. The iron bars were cold and left a damp scent on my gloves. I leaned in with the headlamp again, even though it was full morning, and something white flashed in the corner of my eye like paper. It took my brain a second to make sense of the color. Flowers. Hundreds of them. The ground between the closest stones inside the gate, all along the left side and further in as far as I could see, were covered in small white wildflowers. Not cut flowers, growing. No stems jammed into the soil like a memorial. Not laid out, sprouted, I don't know my plants. Later, Maggie would say wood anemones or something like them. The kind that show up in a flash and then vanish like a completed thought. but there's no way they were there the night before. I'd have seen them. I walk that line every single night. The prison is mostly packed dirt and moss and tufts that border on grass, but nothing full and thick like this, carpeting the ground like snow that never melted. Maggie arrived 10 minutes after I called. You could tell she wanted it to be a prank she could scold someone about. We both stared at the impossible, an overnight bloom inside a locked section with no sign of disturbance. She checked the locks herself, then checked the top of the wall for signs someone had scaled it. There were no scuffs, no muddy smears on the stone. The bars didn't look bent. The smaller side gate we rarely use was bolted from our side with a rotten bolt that would have taken a wrench and a lot of noise to move. No one had been in. Could seeds get washed in? She asked, like she wanted the rain to be the answer. Could they have been lying dormant and just all at once? Maybe, I said, because sometimes the simplest explanation is the only safe thing to choose. The humming from the night before hung between us like a held note. I didn't say it out loud. She said we should document it. We took pictures. She sent a message to a local historian she knows, a woman named Dr. Fraser who does talks on the yard twice a year. Sharp woman with a clean laugh who treats us like colleagues, not staff. We didn't open the gate. Somehow that felt like it would break some rule we hadn't known existed until there were flowers where there shouldn't be. By 11, the yard had its usual foot traffic. A couple of students came through and asked what the fuss was. Maggie told them the prison was closed, which is normal during weather or when maintenance is planned. But they craned their necks through the bars and saw what we saw. Word got around. By mid-afternoon, we had a drip of people wandering up to peer in and whisper. The flowers looked different under brighter light, more delicate than I thought. The sort of white that's almost green at the edges. The kind of thing you'd call pretty if it didn't look like it had grown out of the bones of a story. The humming didn't come back that day, or if it did, I didn't hear it. But I knew where to stand to listen. You learn those things about a place the way you learn where the draft creeps under your door. I kept checking the locks like a nervous tick. That evening, Dr. Fraser arrived in a spotless raincoat and the kind of boots that say, "I'm practical but not poor." She examined the flowers from the gate and took a dozen photos. She asked questions about the locks, the weather, the precise time I'd been there the night before. Old places collect strange coincidences, she said, which annoyed me more than it should have. This didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like a question I wasn't supposed to have heard being asked. She said something else before she left that I keep rolling around like a marble. If it is a prank, she said, it's a kind one. Flowers as vandalism is my favorite sort. I went home and I told myself I wasn't going to go back that night. I don't live far, so that promise was as thin as a wet leaflet. By 10, I was on the path again with my keys. The rain had stopped. The air had that iron smell it gets after a long, cold day of it. The yard was the sort of quiet where your footsteps sound like someone else's following just behind you. I walked to the prison and stood where I'd stood the night before. Nothing. The flowers were shadows beyond the bars, a pale smear under the headlamp. I almost felt relieved. I'd made a story out of a sound. Nature had done the rest. I told myself to call it done and go home. Then I heard the humming. It didn't start from far away. It began like it had been there all along, and I'd only now tuned to the right frequency. The same melody, the same patient rise and fall. I felt my mouth go dry. I turned the headlamp off without deciding to, and that might have been my second mistake. You want to hear better, and suddenly you're standing in a dark graveyard, listening to a woman's voice humming the kind of tune that never changes because it was never written down. If I had to put a shape to it, I'd say it was like the sound you make when you're trying not to wake a child. I said, "Hello?" A little softer this time. The sound went on. I said, "If you're inside, we're closed." The sound went on. And then I realized two things at once in that sharp, electric way. The melody was coming from just inside the gate. Close enough that if I reached through, my hand would have been in it and I recognized it. I didn't know how I knew it, but I did. It was the tune my gran used to hum when she was doing the washing up. She used to say she'd learned it from her mother. And when I was small, I'd sit on the floor with the dog's head on my knee and hear it in the clink of plates. We never knew the words. It was just on a long breath. Hearing it there in that locked place untied something in my chest. For a second, I wanted to cry. The feeling passed like a hand over your face. It left me colder than I've ever been. There was movement then. Not a person, a shift. Like the air had leaned in. The The flowers, God help me, the flowers nearest the gate seemed to stretch. Do plants move at night? Of course they do, a fraction at a time. This was more like the slow press of a crowd. I stepped back. My boot hit the low border stone and slid, and my hand grabbed at the bars to steady myself. The humming hiccuped like someone had been startled, then carried on. I stood there holding iron like a child holding a banister, and realized I could smell something I hadn't before. Not damp stone, not earth, not my own wool jacket. It was a smell of old milk. Not sour, not rotten, just the ghost of milk warmed too long on a stove. I know how that sounds. I know. I switched my lamp back on. The beam cut across the bars and struck the nearest stone in the prison, a chest tomb with no lid, the sort that gathers fallen leaves in autumn. The flowers pooled around its base like foam. I think if the light had shown me anything, any body part, any animal, even a shadow that wasn't mine, I would have run. It showed me nothing but my own breath in a thin cloud and 100 small white faces turned up like sleepers who didn't need to breathe. "Stop," I said, and it came out so pathetic I almost laughed. The humming stopped. You could say my brain did the rest, that I took silence and turned it into a voice. But I heard something else then, soft, lower than a whisper. Not words exactly, a shape of words, a sound like someone remembering their own name. And what I thought I heard was, "Not yet." I backed away slowly, not because I was in control, but because my legs had decided retreat was dignified, and I was grateful. I kept my lamp on the ground because I didn't want to shine it into anything's face. And I got clear of the gate and onto the path where the stones pull back and you can see the city's lights pretending to be stars. I stood there and my hands shook for a minute in a stupid, manageable way, like when you nearly drop your phone and catch it on your foot. I called Alistair again. I said, "Can you just come sit with me for 5 minutes?" He didn't make a fuss. He said, "Aye, give me 5. He pulled up and we sat on the low wall like teenagers cutting class. I didn't tell him about the old milk or the tune being my grand's. I just said I'd heard it again, the humming, and I didn't like it. He nodded and said, "Let's give it a minute," and we did. Nothing happened. Of course it didn't. He asked if I wanted him to check the locks again, and we did, and again there was nothing to find. He drove off and I walked home like a man trying not to look back. In the morning the flowers were thicker. Maggie said, carefully cheerful, "Maybe they always bloom like this and we never knew." She doesn't like the idea of not being in charge of her own place. I said, "Maybe." And we both heard the lie in it. Dr. Fraser came again and crouched by the gate and said something about folklore, how in some places flowers are supposed to mark a saint's bed, or the spot where something bad is trying to make itself gentle. She smiled like she was apologizing for telling a bedtime story to people who didn't sleep well. By afternoon, the tours were coming by with their chattering crowds. A group of teenagers asked if the poltergeist was acting up again. That's what they call the Mackenzie story. I wanted very badly to say this wasn't that it was something smaller and therefore more dangerous, like a needle compared to a sword. I kept my mouth shut and admired my ability not to be melodramatic out loud. The third night is when it went wrong. I shouldn't have gone back. I know that. But I felt a strange responsibility to be there. If you wait through enough late shifts, you begin to feel married to the place, and you go back out of duty the way you call your ma'am every Sunday, even when you've got nothing to say. The air was dry for once. The sky had that clear, hard look like the city had been polished. I checked the main gate, then walked to the prison. The flowers inside were ghost bright without the lamp. The moment I stopped, the humming began again near the gate, coming forward like someone stepping out of a nearly shut door. It was, God help me, welcoming. It made my chest go loose in a way that felt like not having any bones. "I hear you," I said. "I hear you." There was a pressure behind the bars, something like weather without wind. My skin prickled the way it does when an elevator moves. I took my keys out. I didn't decide to. I just had them in my hand, and then one was in the top lock and then the other. I tell myself I only meant to test them, just a check, like a fire drill. The locks clicked open one after the other, an eager sound. I slid the bar. There is a specific weight to certain doors. If you've ever opened the door of your childhood house after it's been empty a while, you know that resistance that is mostly memory. This gate has that. It gave and I pulled and it swung inward a foot on grumbling hinges. The smell of the place came out like breath held all day. Earth and old damp and that hint of milk again, warmer now, nearer. I stood there with the gate open and had the perfectly normal impulse to step inside and close it behind me. The way you step into a friend's kitchen and shut the door so the heat doesn't escape. I put one boot over the threshold. "Rob?" The voice came from behind me, and I swear it tore something in the air. It was Maggie. She'd come to drop off some forms for me to sign for a repair. She stopped dead when she saw the open gate and me half inside it like a sleepwalker on a balcony. I took my foot back and the humming snapped off like a string breaking. "Don't," she said flat, as if we were near a cliff and I hadn't seen it. She put her hand on my arm. Not hard, but there. Human weight. Human heat. If you've ever been pulled from a riptide back into chest-deep water, it was like that. You don't realize how far out you were until your toes find sand. We shut the gate. I locked both locks carefully like I was in a training video. Maggie looked at me with a kind of quiet that wasn't anger. She asked, "What did you hear?" And I told her. All of it, even the milk and my grand's tune. She didn't tell me I was being daft. She said, "Let's not open this again tonight," which is the most sensible thing anyone has ever said. I walked her back to the path, and we stood a few minutes talking about nothing. The way you do after a bad near miss so you don't have to go home with your hands still shaking. When we turned to go, we both heard it, very faint and far away now, from deep within the prison where the path takes a turn behind the far enclosure. A new sound. It was crying. Not loud, not theatrical, just the steady, hiccuping sob of a tired child. It lasted all of 30 seconds and stopped. We didn't move. The yard felt like a stone in your mouth, Maggie said without looking at me. "We're going to call Alistair." We did, and he came with another officer this time. A woman I hadn't met who had a way of looking at things that made you feel she would keep the world up on her shoulder for a minute to give you a break. We explained, which sounded deranged in the plainness of it. They looked through the bars with their torches, saw the flowers, the stones, the empty path. The woman officer asked if the crying could have been a fox. Foxes cry like dying people sometimes. We agreed that was possible. Sensible. The sensible thing is always a kindness. We checked the walls and the locks. All as before. "Leave it shut," Alistair said. "We'll walk the perimeter a few times tonight." He gave me that look he gives when he wants me to go home and be somewhere someone can watch me. I went home. I sat in my living room and didn't turn the television on. I thought about the gate being open and I felt a second wave of that pull, like leaning into heat on a winter day. If Maggie hadn't spoken, I think I would have gone in and sat down on the ground like a man who has come home late. In the morning, there were more flowers. Both sides of the prison this time. Up the line of the path under the iron rails where nothing ever grows because it's too compacted. The news got around faster. People came to look. A woman put her fingers through the bars and cried without making any sound. Dr. Fraser took more pictures and did not try to joke. Maggie closed the prison outright for a week. No tours near it. No one close enough to touch the gate. She said it was for preservation, which wasn't a lie. I spent my nights elsewhere in the yard, patching this and that, keeping my keys in my pocket as if that alone would stop me from doing something I didn't decide to do. I wish I could tell you that the humming stopped and everything went back to normal. It didn't. It came every third or fourth night, sometimes closer, sometimes like a radio in another room. Once, during a clear night when the moon made everything look staged, I heard the tune drifting all the way to the old potter's field, thin as thread. I didn't go toward it. I stood by the gate and counted to 100 like a child holding their breath in a game, and then went home. On the 7th morning, the flowers were gone. Not ruined, not trampled, gone like a show packed up overnight. Where they had been, the dirt looked smoother than it should have, an evenness you get from hands. There were no footprints. The padlocks had not moved. A tour guide said, "Well, that's that," and clapped his hands for his group like he'd just announced the end of a film. I nodded and didn't say what came into my head, that sometimes the end is the beginning with the volume turned down. A week later, an older man came by mid-afternoon with a bunch of daffodils from the supermarket. He stood by the prison and tried the gate as if he didn't understand why it wouldn't open for him. I went over and asked if I could help. He said he'd grown up in the neighborhood and his mother used to bring him here on Sundays with a flask of tea. He said she'd hum while he ran along the path until she called him back. He held up the flowers and said, "She went last month." I thought she might like, and then he stopped because the words sounded wrong in his mouth. I told him I could tuck them just inside the bars where they'd be safe. He handed them over and cleared his throat like he was swallowing a stone. I slid the stems through the gap at the bottom of the bars, careful not to lay them in the damp where they'd rot too fast. The man thanked me and stood a long time with his head bent. I almost told him about the humming. I almost said, "Was it this tune?" and hummed the line I've been hearing in my sleep. I didn't. He walked away lighter, which is all you can ask of a place like this. You want a proper ending. I understand. I want to tell you that we found a speaker hidden in a drain and an art student confessed and we laughed until our stomachs hurt. Or I want to tell you that I went in one night with a flask and a wool blanket and sat with whatever was there, and it told me its story, and we came to a kind of peace. None of that happened. Here is how it ended, if you want to call it that. 3 nights after the daffodils, I woke at 2 in the morning with the tune in my head. That alone isn't new. What was new was that I could hear it as a vibration in the room, the way you hear someone's phone buzz on the table. It was soft and patient and so close I could feel tears crawl behind my eyes without falling. I put my clothes on and walked to the yard without deciding. I know the streets at that hour. Edinburgh at 2 is a different city, all teeth out and slippers on. I didn't meet a soul. I climbed the hill and let myself in. It wasn't raining. The sky had that thin layer of cloud that turns the whole place into a room with the light left on in the hall. I walked to the prison and stood there like a man waiting outside a door he's knocked on his whole life. The humming stopped. There was a very long silence. And then, just this once, there were words. They came from somewhere near the center, from the place where the path hooks left around the back wall. They were small. The way you speak to someone you don't want to wake, and they were not words I can give you exactly. Not because I'm keeping them, but because I don't remember them the way I remember the tune. They were something like, "He's quiet now." I stood there with my forehead against the bars like a person at a hospital bed. I don't know who I thought I was grieving. My gran, every mother, every child, myself. It all felt like the same shape. I said out loud, "Thank you." I don't know who I was thanking. The next morning there were no flowers. The day after that, something else changed. The latch on the smaller side gate, remember the one with the rotten bolt, was clean. Not new, not replaced, clean. The rust was gone like it had been polished with oil and cloth. The bolt still wouldn't move without a wrench, and there were no marks from one, but the metal had a dull shine. Maggie saw it and said, "Did you?" And I said no. We both touched it and felt the smoothness where there had been grit. We looked at each other and let it be one more thing in a pile of things we'd never have to explain in any official capacity. I haven't heard the humming since. That was 3 months ago. I still walk the path at night. I still check the locks. Sometimes I feel that soft pressure at my back, like someone reminding me to take my keys home. If you visit, you might find the prison closed or open, depending on the day and what the tours are doing. If you put your ear to the bars, you'll hear what there is to hear. Wind, traffic, your own blood. Or maybe you'll catch a note or two of something older and smaller. If you do, and it sounds like something your mother or gran sang without thinking while she dried the dishes, don't be afraid. Just don't open the gate. There's one last thing I should say for neatness, though there's nothing neat about it. 2 weeks ago, a small article ran in the local paper, the kind you skip unless you're retired and reading your way through the day. It was about a researcher tracing burial records from the 17th century, finding names that had gone missing from lists, doing the ordinary saints' work of putting people back on paper. The piece mentioned the discovery that in a particular bad month, mothers were allowed into the prison to bring food to their imprisoned sons. It said sometimes they were turned away late after dark and would sit by the wall humming to keep the boys calm on the other side. I cut the piece out and put it in my wallet and then took it out and put it in the drawer by my bed, because I don't like carrying heavy things in my pocket. I haven't told anyone about it. Not Maggie, not Alistair, not Dr. Fraser, who would have a sensible thing to say I don't want to hear. What I want is less complicated. When I lock the gate at night, I press my palm to the iron and I say good night under my breath, the way you say it when you're the last one to leave the kitchen and the kettle is cooling itself. It feels ridiculous. It also feels like the only decent thing. I don't think the dead need us the way we mean it when we say need, but I think they appreciate manners. If you go to Greyfriars and see wildflowers where they shouldn't be, don't pick them. Don't post them for likes. Stand there a minute, listen. If you hear nothing, fine. If you hear something, finer still. Either way, when you walk away, leave the gate as you found it. Some doors are meant to be tended, not opened. Some songs are for singing to someone who can't answer. And some nights the kindest thing you can do is hum back and then, when it stops, go home. I got hired at Elmwood Cemetery in late March, the last year the city still called it seasonal grounds work, before they switched to contractors. It was one of those Midwestern springs where the sky could be bright for 20 minutes and pitch gray the next, where the wind never stopped tugging your jacket and the smell of thawing earth clung to everything. I grew up a mile from the place and rode my bike past its iron gates 10,000 times, but I never really looked at it until I started opening the grounds at 7 every morning, unlocking the side service gate, pulling the chain and letting the day in. I worked under Ray, the supervisor, 60-ish, heavyset, a man who spoke in lists and hated wasted motion. In the office we had Marla at the desk with the maps and the laminated plot books, and Miguel and Darlene out on maintenance with me. We cut grass, trimmed around stones, patched the gravel lanes, and straightened flags after storms. That was the job, and for the first week that's all it was. The first time I saw the kid was on a Tuesday. A storm had rolled through the night before and scattered wet branches everywhere, especially around the north slope where the older family plots sat under big maples. I was dragging a tarp piled with limbs when something bright flicked in the corner of my eye. A little boy in a blue jacket darted behind the Rains mausoleum, one of those squat granite houses with a bronze door and a stained glass window on the back. It registered the way you register a squirrel: color, motion, then the brain fills it in. Blonde hair, small, quick. I called out before I thought about it. "Hey, bud, you can't be out here alone." The wind swallowed my voice. I pulled the tarp closer and walked toward the mausoleum, expecting one of two things. Either the boy would pop out laughing and we'd track down a parent, or I'd find nobody because I'd imagined it. What I didn't expect was the feeling. I don't even have a good word for it. Like the air got thin and bright at the same time, like the way it feels under power lines when your arm hair lifts. The jacket color hung in my head as I circled the mausoleum, blue like a school backpack, fresh, not faded. I checked one side, then the other, then the back where the little strip of lawn meets a limestone wall. No kid. Nothing but slick grass, a couple of clay-caked tracks from our cart, and muddy water running toward the drain. I stood there a second longer than I needed to, squinting. It would have been easy to shrug it off. I did. I pulled the tarp, finished my loop, dumped the branches behind the shop, and told myself it was a trick of light. But when I clocked out and passed the office, I mentioned it to Marla anyway. I said it without drama, half laughing, because the rational part of me needed to hear how dumb it sounded out loud. "Thought I saw a kid over by Rains," I said. "Blue jacket, blonde, maybe some family visiting." She didn't look up right away. She was initialing a burial order and tapping her pen like she was counting. When she finally glanced over, she didn't look surprised. She looked like someone deciding what to say. "You mean Tommy?" she said quietly. "You probably mean Tommy. Who's—" She turned the plastic frame on her desk toward me. There were 4 photos under the glass. The one in the top right was a school picture, the kind they used to print with a cheesy starburst background. Blonde hair, ears a little big, front teeth just grown in. Blue jacket with white stripes on the sleeves. The caption card below said, "Tommy Rains, 1967-1974. "That's the family mausoleum you were at," she added, as if I needed it. I didn't know what to say. I'm not the guy who immediately jumps to ghost stories. I wanted a third option, like maybe a relative liked dressing their kid exactly like the photo for some weird commemorative reason. I must have looked confused because Marla shook her head. "People see him sometimes," she said. "It's a thing. You don't have to believe it. But that's probably who you mean." Miguel walked in behind me and grabbed the key ring off the hook. "You telling him about Tommy?" he asked, like you ask about a street dog everyone knows. I laughed because that's how I handle things that don't fit. They didn't press it. Neither did I. The days stretched clean and ordinary after that. We had 2 interments that week. One on Thursday morning, another Friday afternoon, and funerals have a way of focusing everyone. You make the grounds neat, you stack green mats over the dirt. You make the place look like sadness doesn't stain. The Rains mausoleum sat 30 yards up the hill, silent. The photo on Marla's desk kept popping into my head at weird times, especially when I'd walk past the office and the glass frame would catch sunlight and flash. I started noticing the small things you only see when you're trying not to. A tiny plastic truck near the base of a headstone with no recent tire marks around it. A hopscotch of small shoe prints that started and stopped on the asphalt as if they'd been placed there, not walked. I told myself it was the families. There were always kids around on Sundays. That's what cemeteries are, really. Family parks with rules nobody wants to say out loud. On Monday, the radio in our utility cart started acting stupid. It was an old push-to-talk unit wired to the battery, and it liked to squeal if you keyed it too fast. But this was different. Darlene and I were edging around Section C when the radio hissed and a child's voice, clear, thin, close, counted 1, 2, 3, and then nothing. We both froze. I lifted my thumb so I wouldn't be the idiot transmitting static and said, "Ray? You on?" No answer. Then our usual grackle noise came back and Ray barked that we were due at the south gate to meet a backhoe delivery. We didn't talk about the counting right away. You don't want to be the one who makes it a thing. But as we bounced down the lane, Darlene said, "Did you hear that? Probably bleeding from someone else's channel. Do we have any other channels?" "Probably not," I said. She looked at me for a second and then shook her head like she was annoyed at herself, not me. "It sounded like a kid," she said. That afternoon I had to open the Rains mausoleum. That's not normal. Families don't come often, and when they do, they call and we unlock the door for a visit. But Ray got a request. Someone from the Rains line wanted to check an inscription inside. He handed me the bronze key from the cabinet and said, "In and out. Don't touch anything you don't have to." He's not superstitious, but he respects other people's superstitions. The bronze door stuck and then let go with a clap. Inside, the air was cool and layered with that smell of old flowers, sweet, papery. There were 6 vaults on either wall, 3 each with little nameplates. I didn't look at the names. There was a small marble shelf under the stained glass where visitors left things. A folded church program, a vial of holy water, a paper crane, a Hot Wheels car with chipped red paint. The stained glass threw a blue diamond of light on the floor. I put my hand in the light because I'm an idiot sometimes, because I wanted to prove I wasn't thinking about the boy. The door clicked soft behind me as the wind pulled and settled. The quiet in there wasn't empty. It had a shape, the way quiet does in a library when you know you're being listened to. I took the photo on my phone of the inside inscription like the family had requested, texted it to Ray, and reached to set the Hot Wheels car back because I'd nudged it a fraction. When my fingers touched the car, something scuffed outside the door. Not footsteps. The sound of a shoe dragging. I swallowed and told myself it was a branch in the wind. I opened the door. There was nobody on the landing. A small wet footprint darkened the smooth stone just to the right of the threshold. Barefoot, toes splayed like a little kid's after running. The print wasn't fully outlined. The middle had a dry spot where the arch didn't touch. It could have been old, but it looked fresh, the edges still seeping water into the stone. I put my boot half over it and stepped back inside because that felt safer in a way, like the building was proper, and the outside was where my brain was making tricks. I took one last photo to prove I'd done what I came to do, then relocked the door and took the key back to Ray. I didn't say anything about the footprint. He didn't ask. That night I couldn't get the sound of that scuff out of my head. I kept picturing the little diamond of blue light on the floor in the Hot Wheels car not quite where it had been. I told myself to let it go. I didn't. The next morning I planted petunias around the veterans section and kept glancing up the hill like someone was waving for me. The wind moved the new flags and they clicked against their poles. 2 older women in matching windbreakers walked laps and nodded every time they passed. It was normal, except it wasn't because every time I turned my head fast I thought I saw blue. Miguel broke it for me around lunch. He said, "You saw the footprint, right?" I didn't pretend. He told me he'd seen chalk marks once, child-sized like a hopscotch across the lane, on a day it rained all morning. He told me he'd picked up a marble by the fountain, the old-school kind with swirls in it, and when he set it on the office counter to show Marla, it rolled by itself in a curve and dropped off because the counter wasn't level. "It's not bad," he said. "It's not mean. It's just there." "Who was he?" I asked finally. "I mean, who was Tommy?" Miguel shrugged. "Ask Marla, she's the historian." I waited until the phones were quiet and asked. Marla didn't give me a big story. She just told me what she knew. Tommy Rains was 7 when he died. He got sick, she didn't know what. The obituary just said after a brief illness like they all did back then, and his family had him interred in the family mausoleum. His grandfather built that thing in the 30s, she said, tapping a map with her pen. They were big in construction. There's an old newspaper article framed in the corridor about the company. She paused and chose her next sentence carefully. People started seeing him again in the late 80s. Not all the time. Little flashes. A jacket, a laugh. He's not the only one. Cemeteries are full of people and full of love. It doesn't vanish because you can't see it. The way she said it, calm, unselling, made me feel less stupid for all the ways my skin had been crawling. It also made me want to do my job even more carefully around that hill. The next week I noticed small differences in how I moved. I didn't drive too close to the rain steps with the cart. I'd catch myself pausing a second before the engine turned, like you do when a cat is under a car. I started leaving a little space on the shelf inside the mausoleum, as if I were setting a place. Strange things piled up, but never enough to break the day. We found a tiny blue mitten under a holly bush in June when the heat was stupid, and no one had worn a mitten in months. We kept hearing that counting on the radio. Always just 1, 2, 3, never 4. Once, during a funeral, a boy separated from his family and spun in a tight circle near the Rains plot, laughing at nothing. His mother rushed over, embarrassed, and the boy kept insisting, "He's fast," like he'd been playing tag. After they left, I found a small smudge of fresh mud on the base stone. Here's the part I don't tell people because it sounds like I'm trying to sell it. None of that scared me, not exactly. It pulled on something. It made me careful in a way I hadn't been careful since I was a kid, and believed everything could be hurt. I started talking out loud while I worked. Not much, just enough to be polite. "Coming through," I'd say with the trimmer. "Watch your head." I set a little toy truck on the mausoleum shelf one morning when Marla said she was clearing out the supply closet and asked if anyone wanted a bag of random things that turned up. Pennies. Safety pins, a frog bead, that truck. I wiped the dust off before I left it. It felt dumb and exactly right at the same time. If the story ended there, it would be something I'd tell at a cookout. It doesn't end there. It turns one more time in that way life does, with something practical that was nobody's fault. On an August afternoon, the kind where thunderheads build like skyscrapers and everything is an argument waiting to happen, the storm siren went once and then cut off. Ray told us to secure loose tools and keep working until the lightning got within 5 miles. I was up by the Rains mausoleum raking gravel back into the lane when the air changed, bright thin again, and the wind stopped. I didn't hear anything at first. Then the radio hissed. 1, a child's voice said. 2, 3, clear right in my ear. I thumbed off the radio. It wasn't that I didn't want to hear it. It was that I wanted to hear nothing. A woman in a black dress was halfway up the slope, moving too fast for the heat, calling, "Evan! Evan!" I recognized the panic. I'd heard it in stores, parks, anywhere people had children. I waved and yelled, "Where did you see him last?" She pointed behind her at the fountain and said he loved trains and he'd run off and she couldn't see him. I scanned the stones in the lane and the green tent they'd set up for a graveside later that day. You can't get lost in Elmwood, not really. But when you're 7, the hills are bigger than they are to us. I told her to check the office and headed higher because that's where the boy at the fountain would go. I was not thinking about Tommy. I was thinking about a real kid with a train shirt the woman had described. About how fast children move when they're excited. About how many places a small person can duck. I reached the mausoleum landing and said out loud, "Hey, anyone up here?" Because I didn't want to spook a kid and have him bolt. I heard the scuff inside the mausoleum before I understood what it was. A drag, a shift. The door was locked, but the bronze handle twitched slightly like someone inside had bumped it. The sound was so small I questioned it even as I pulled out the key from my pocket. The one Ray makes us carry on storm days because if you have to shelter, the mausoleums are safer than trees. My hand shook as I slid the key in. "I'm opening the door," I said. "Don't be scared." The door stuck and then gave. Inside, the light from the stained glass was thin and gray because the clouds had moved. The little shelf held the church program, the holy water, the paper crane, the red Hot Wheels car I'd straightened, and the blue mitten I had not left. On the floor, close to the far corner, a boy's sneaker toed out from the dim, a flash of red stripe on the side. I stepped in, and before my brain could complete any picture, a small face turned toward me in the weak blue light. The eyes were wide and perfectly, heartbreakingly alive. "Hey," I said, louder than I meant to. "Hey, buddy?" My voice bounced off the stone and came back softer, like the room was repeating it for him. "Mom's looking for you." He didn't answer. He didn't look like the photo on Marla's desk. He looked like a living boy around 7 with damp hair sticking to his forehead.
He had on a t-shirt with a freight train on it.
He was breathing hard the way kids do after running. His other sneaker was tucked under his leg. I got turned around, he said finally, and then he did that kid thing where they only look at you out of the sides of their eyes because they don't want to show they're scared. I was hiding. It's okay, I said. You're okay. A drop of thunder walked across the sky outside. The air in the mausoleum changed again, pulled tight like a storm takes a deep breath. I didn't want to be in there when it cut loose, and I didn't want to move fast. Can you stand up? He nodded and stuck one hand out. I took it. It was warm and small and absolutely real. I will swear that to anyone. I pulled him up, and his sneakers squeaked on the stone and left a damp arc. I led him to the door and turned back to pull it half closed because that's what I was thinking. Keep the rain out. I glanced at the shelf without meaning to, and saw the blue mitten move as if a finger beneath it pressed. It could have been the draft. It could have been my heartbeat, which was in my throat and everywhere else. We stepped out into air that smelled like tin. The woman's voice called from the road below. Evan! The boy yanked his hand out of mine and yelled back, Mom! And then he bolted down the steps. I followed slower because my legs didn't belong to me for a second. She met him on the lane and scooped him like he was smaller than he was, scolding and crying and laughing all at once. That's when the sky broke. The rain came hard and flat. We ran for the green tent and stood under it, the 3 of us plus 2 groundsmen from the funeral home who'd been checking straps. The boy shook water off his arms and grinned, and his mother kept saying, Don't do that to me, into his hair. Over her shoulder, through the rain, I saw a smear of darker blue by the mausoleum, like a jacket hem slipping out of sight. I don't know if that's what I saw. I know what I felt. Gratitude, ridiculous and huge like a wave. The storm blew through in 10 minutes and left everything rinsed and humming. The funeral home guys went back to their work, and the mother thanked me too many times, and the boy told me in very serious detail about a freight engine he'd seen in a book. They left. The hillside, that post-rain smell of grass and coins. I climbed the steps again because I had to lock the door. My clothes clung cold to my back. Inside the mausoleum, the air tasted like rain, though it shouldn't have. A small wet footprint, bare, shone on the stone just left of the shelf. It overlapped a damp sneaker print. I stood there longer than I should have, the bronze key biting my palm. When I finally reached to turn the lock, the radio on my belt hissed, and the child's voice, close and thin, counted 1, 2, 3. Then silence like a held breath. I thumbed the radio and said, Thanks, because it was the only word that fit without breaking something inside me. After that day, things changed in a way that's hard to describe. It wasn't that we saw more. It was that the not seeing had shape. Marla started finding little blue items tucked near her photo frame. Nothing dramatic, just a paper clip someone had wrapped in blue thread, a piece of wrapper from a Tootsie Pop, a blue crayon nub. Miguel swore he heard a giggle by the fountain at 6 in the morning when no one else was around, and he swore it didn't make him mad to hear it. Darlene bought a pack of 5 Hot Wheels from the dollar store and set one on the shelf every Monday, and by Friday it would have a new place on the marble, turned like a car that had been pushed at a gentle angle. None of it was proof. None of it was a story you could make money off of. It was just the way the cemetery felt, full. A month later, in September, the air crisper and the maples thinking about turning, a man came in who said he was doing genealogy research on the Rains family. He wore a tie and carried a folder. Marla gave him the map and the usual disclaimers. He lingered at the desk and asked if we ever had trouble with kids. Kids? She asked. Like teenagers? He shook his head. Little ones, he said. And then he looked at the photo in her frame the way people look at a row of donuts before they pick one. He pointed. That one, he said. Tommy, that's my uncle. I never met him. He told us, without prompting and without drama, that he'd grown up with stories about a little boy who loved counting games and trucks, who hid in closets and under tables and laughed when people found him. He said nobody in the family could talk about the illness part for long. They would circle it and then land on some other detail, like the blue jacket with white stripes or the way he'd stack 2 trucks and call them the 2-3. He smiled when he said that, and then the smile faltered like a bird in a crosswind. He asked if he could sit inside the mausoleum for a minute. Marla said yes. He went up alone, and when he came back down 20 minutes later, his tie was crooked and his eyes were bright, like he'd been staring at something far away or close up too long. He thanked us and left a small toy, a brand new Hot Wheels in the package, on the desk, and asked if we'd put it on the shelf for him the next time we were up there. I did. It sat on that shelf one day, and the next it had been opened without the plastic rattling anywhere we could find. The car placed gently beside the blue mitten. That's the whole story, except it isn't. You could come work at Elmwood for a season and never notice any of it. You could walk your grief along the lanes and only meet what you brought. That's true too. The part I can't explain is how it changed the way I move through the world. I lock the shop now and say out loud, I'll be back in the morning. I pick up the tiny things I used to ignore, a marble, a wrapper, and wonder who meant them for whom. When the radio hisses and the counting comes, 1, 2, 3, rare now, not as often, I stop what I'm doing and listen to the space after 3. The way you listen for a train that's not here yet but will be. Sometimes I answer. Not every time. I don't want to make it a habit he has to keep. On my last day of the season, with the maples finally turning fire at the edges, I went up to the Rains mausoleum alone to make sure the door was clean and the landing swept. I set the broom against the bronze and stood there, not wanting to make a moment out of it, not wanting to pretend I knew anything at all about how any of this works. I opened the door and the light made that stupid, beautiful blue diamond on the floor. The shelf held the usual: church program, holy water, paper crane faded at one wing, 3 Hot Wheels cars, the mitten folded now like a small hand at rest. I took out the new map of the grounds we'd printed and tucked it under the shelf lip so the next person would see it. As I closed the door, the radio hissed. The voice didn't count. It whispered a single syllable that could have been my name and could have been nothing. The wind moved across the hill and rattled the dry edges of leaves. If you come to Elmwood on a normal day, you'll see the things you expect. Flowers, flags, people who love other people. You might hear laughter that you can place and laughter you can't. If you're by the north slope and you think you see blue slip behind the mausoleum, don't run after it like a fool. Just stop and say, I see you, and then go back to what you were doing. Later, when your radio crackles for no reason, try not to be afraid of the silence that follows. Some things don't want to scare you. Some things are just making sure the game still works, that somebody will always come find you when you hide. That's what I tell myself anyway when I'm in my kitchen at home washing dirt off my hands, and the smell of old flowers comes back for no good reason. I look at the toy truck on my windowsill, the one I kept by accident. The red paint chipped, and I count under my breath, not to 3 but to nothing. And in that space I hear small feet on stone and the drag of a sneaker and a laugh that isn't meant for fear, only for being found. I can't prove any of it. I wouldn't try. But when I pass the photo on Marla's desk, even now when I stop by to say hi, I nod like I'm clocking in. Sometimes the glass catches the light and flashes blue. Sometimes the hallway smells like rain when it shouldn't. Sometimes I think I hear a kid on the radio start to count and stop because he doesn't need to go to 3. He already knows I'm here. He already knows I saw him. And if you ever work there, you might see him too, and you'll do what I did. Hold the door, set the toy back in place, and say thanks to the quiet that answers as if it's been waiting for you all along. I'm not a monk. I'm a language teacher who ran out of money in Osaka and took a seasonal job up on Mount Koya because a friend of a friend said the monastery kitchen sometimes hired foreigners for dishwashing and morning chores. It felt like a free reset. Clean air, clean food, phones in a drawer after sunset, and at night the cedar forest of Okinoin breathing in the wind like a living thing. I promised myself I'd stay a month to clear my head. I stayed 3. Then I left and tried not to think about what happened on the last week, because thinking about it made the smell come back, the clean, bitter smell of lamp oil and something like heated stone. If you've never been to Okinoin, picture a trail of soft stone steps that goes farther than your legs want to carry you. On both sides are old graves and stupas furred with moss and lichens the color of matcha. There are Jizo statues with little red bibs and small cups with rainwater caught in them for travelers with no bodies, and lanterns on tall posts that glow at dusk like low stars. The wind never stops. It's not dramatic. It's just there, circling the cedar trunks and moving the thin paper tied to ropes. Past a certain bridge, I learned to say Gobyo no Hashi. Voices get quiet without anyone asking them to. If you believe the stories, the monk Kobo Daishi is not dead in his mausoleum. He's meditating, waiting, and the monks bring him meals every day. Whether you believe it or not doesn't matter. Everyone acts as if it's true, and the way people act changes the air. My days were simple. I scrubbed big pots that could have hidden a person, ladled rice porridge, and tried not to trip over the little wooden clogs by the kitchen door. After breakfast, I helped sweep pine needles from the monastery courtyard with a broom that looked like it would dissolve in the first rain. Sometimes I translated for tourists, which mostly meant repeating, "Please don't photograph inside," and bow before the bridge. At night, if it wasn't my turn to help in the kitchen before dawn, I slept like I'd been carried there. Two people I knew better than anyone up there were a novice named Taro and a woman named Aya who worked as a guide. Taro was young and serious in the way that made him seem older, which I guess comes with shaving your head and waking every morning at 4. He taught me how to knot the visitor's sash correctly and kept a tiny aluminum flashlight tucked in his sleeve. Aya was older than me by 5 or 6 years, wore sturdy boots, and could switch from English to Kansai Japanese to slow, careful Tokyo Japanese without breathing. She had that proper guide tone until the group was gone, and then she'd laugh with her whole face. People trusted her in the way they trust someone who has walked the same trail every day for years and never once slipped on the moss. The first time I heard about the Lantern Man was my second week. It was cold that night, the kind of cold that presses a line across your nose and makes your teeth feel separate from your gums. The kitchen was done early, and I took a walk down toward the first bridge to loosen my back. I wasn't supposed to go far. We were all told not to linger after dark, which felt dramatic until you spent a night up there and realized how quickly the forest swallowed light. I stood at the rail and watched the river moving dark under the surface. The lanterns along the path were lit, small circles of comfort. I'll admit I talked to myself a little, saying out loud the words I'd learned that day and trying to make them stick. That was when I saw a light moving that wasn't in a fixed place. I thought it was someone with a headlamp at first, because it went behind a tree and came back out, and it had the uneven, slightly bobbing motion of a person walking. I was glad to see it. It meant someone else was out there. Then Aya's voice came from the path behind me. She touched my sleeve. "You shouldn't be here alone this late," she said, keeping it teasing so I wouldn't feel scolded. I pointed to the light. "Is someone still out there?" Her breath smoked in the air. "Maybe a monk. They walk at night between gates." We stood and watched. The light drifted down the path and then stopped near the second bridge. It stayed there for a few heartbeats, as if the person holding it was looking down into the river. It brightened, then dimmed. Then it slid sideways and was gone. Not as if it had walked away into the trees, but as if someone had turned down a dimmer switch somewhere, and the light simply faded to the idea of itself and then nothing. Aya made a thoughtful sound. "You see why we say not to linger." "It was a monk?" I asked. "Maybe," she said, and her mouth did a small unhappy twist. "Come on. You'll get sick standing in one place." When we reached the spot where the light had paused, there was a black circle on the stones the size of a bowl. At first I thought it was where the path was wet, but when I stepped closer I caught the baked mineral smell you get near a metal railing that sat in the sun all day. Except it was a cold night, and there was no sun to heat anything. I put my hand out stupidly. The stones were warm. I yanked my hand back and laughed, because that's what I do when something is wrong enough to scare me. My body looks for the nearest exit, and humor is closest. Aya didn't laugh. She touched my wrist, not harsh, and pulled my hand farther away. "We go," she said very quietly. "Please." In the kitchen the next morning I told Taro about it, because if there was some normal explanation he would know. He didn't look surprised. He poured tea for himself, then for me, and we stood side by side looking out the door at the courtyard like two men in an old painting. "Sometimes it is a monk," he said. "Sometimes it is something that walks like a monk." That's a creepy way to say it. He accepted that without comment. "When we patrol at night we carry lanterns. The old way. Oil. They make this small sound when the oil is hot and the wick is right." He made a faint tongue-clicking sound. I recognized it as soon as he did it, which startled me, because I remembered hearing it. "You smell the oil sometimes before you see the light. Old oil smells different. Not like the lamps we buy now. And the dark circle on the stones? Our teacher says minds like to see patterns," he said, "which I have since learned is monk speak, for I'm not going to give you the answer you want. He also says the stones remember heat longer than we think." "So there is an answer," I said. "Maybe more than one," he said. After that, I noticed the light more often. Sometimes it was far off, only a suggestion through the cedars like a lightning bug in slow motion. Sometimes I rounded a curve and it was there in front of me, bright enough to make me squint. Floating at shoulder height where the path curved toward a wooden gate that smiled in that way, Shinto gates smile, welcoming and warning. Always it moved like a person who knew the path. Step, pause, step, step. Occasional swing to one side like a man turning to look at a stone or a name. The sound of hot oil ticking in a quiet rhythm. And sometimes afterward a place where the stones were warm. Not always. That felt worse somehow. Like there was a pattern I didn't understand because I wasn't a part of it. The story started to stick to it. A couple from Tokyo swore they saw a man in old robes carrying the light, and that when they bowed to him, he bowed back. Very correct. And then turned and walked into trees that aren't there. A delivery driver who'd brought rice to the kitchen late told me he followed the light too far one night and ended up standing on the wrong side of a gate he wasn't supposed to cross after dark. He couldn't remember how he got there. A monk from a different temple said his grandfather had been a novice here in the 1930s and wrote in a diary about a night when he and another boy patrolled and saw two lights moving together like men, talking. Does everyone see it? I asked Aya. She shook her head. Not everyone who wants to. Not everyone who doesn't. That's not helpful, I know. Why do you stay if it scares you? She smiled a little. It doesn't scare me. Not exactly. It reminds me to do what I say I do. Bow when I should. Walk where I'm allowed. You don't have to be afraid of a storm if you respect where the river will go. The third week, Taro had night duty and I made the mistake of telling him I'd seen the light near the Gobyo Bridge after a group of tourists said they heard footsteps behind them and turned, and there was no one there. He tightened his sash a notch and looked at the floor. You could come with me, he said, as if the words had slipped out without the part of his brain that knows better checking them first. Aya caught us on the path and didn't pretend she thought it was a good idea. Watch the time, she told Taro. If you're near the inner bridge at midnight, you wait. You don't cross. You don't lean. You wait. I know, he said, not rudely, just with the endurance of someone who has been told the same thing since he was tall enough to carry a bucket. She touched the sleeve where his little flashlight lived. And this stays off unless you need it. If there is light, you let it do its work. What does it work on? I asked before I could stop myself. She turned her head and actually considered it. Memory, she said, and then she left us. We walked. It was one of those cloudless nights that looks clean in photographs but feels huge and cold in person. Our breath felt like a thing we carried. From time to time, Taro stopped to listen and my body stopped with him because his body knew when to do it, and I trusted his rhythms now more than my own. The small offerings along the path, folded cranes, coins, little plastic cups, had frozen meniscus rings of ice in them that caught the light from the lantern posts and turned them milky. Somewhere back along the trail, we heard what sounded like a hand brushing a bamboo screen very gently. It stopped when we stopped. It started when we started. The first time we saw the light that night, it was between two cedar trunks ahead. A warm yellow the size of a fist. It moved toward us lazily, as if whoever held it was reading the names on the stones and not in a hurry. It crossed the path to our left. I tensed without meaning to. Taro's hand brushed my sleeve, not to hold me back, but to remind me he was there. The light passed behind another tree and out the other side, and for that second you could see no body at all. Nothing but the circle of light and the white edge it put on the bark. When it reached a bend in the path, it paused. The ticking sound of hot oil was clear. Then it moved on. We didn't follow it more than a few steps at a time. That had been part of Aya's instructions when she decided we were going to be stubborn enough to go anyway, and made the rules for us. If it stops, you stop. If you lose sight, you do not run. You do not call. You do not ask. You keep your feet where feet go and your hands where hands belong. It stopped at the second bridge. I know there are names for all of them, but in my head even now they are the first, the second, and the one you are not supposed to cross after midnight unless you live there and know what you're doing. The light hovered above the center of the span like a bright coin in deep water and turned a little, like a person's wrist turning a handle. The smell reached us then, clean oil, not the sharp chemical smell from disposable camp lanterns. There was something else under it, the smell of heated iron, of a pan you'd just taken off a flame. When the light moved again, it didn't bob, it slid. That made Taro make a sound I had not heard from him before. A small, almost syllable he swallowed so fast you would think it hadn't happened if you didn't feel your own spine answer it. The light went to the far side of the bridge and kept on, steady. We let it go. My hands had found the rail without my permission. It was cold as the river. When we stepped onto the stones where the light had rested, I felt warmth through the soles of my shoes. "Do you feel that?" I asked. "Yes," Taro said, and he did not look down. We keep walking. The next hour was a lesson in patience I didn't know how to learn. The light appeared and disappeared, sometimes far ahead, sometimes suddenly close enough that I could see a darker shape behind it. Not tall, not short, exactly what you would call a person if you saw it in daylight with your normal brain. Once it passed so near that its glow reached my sleeve, and for a heartbeat, I saw my own skin lit amber like a hand held to a candle. In that same breath came the click of the oil and the whisper sound of a wick curved just so. There was heat against my thigh as if I'd stood next to a space heater. I flinched and looked down, and there was nothing there, just the sense that a weight had hung by my side and swung, and had not brushed me out of politeness. When we reached the inner gate, the one with the wood so old you could see the grain standing up like a field in winter, the light stopped at the exact center of the bridge beyond, as if the whole world were measured from that very point. Midnight is a human thing. The forest did not know it and did not care, but every monk in earshot had taught my body to, and when the phone in my pocket clicked over in its small dry way to 0°, the light flared and then went still as if waiting for someone to catch up. "We wait," Taro said, and his voice had that thin, baked quality of a pot left too long in the kiln. We waited. The light did not bob, but every now and then it rose a finger's width and fell again in the rhythm of a breath. I could see very clearly the shape of an old-style lantern then, the kind I had seen in paintings and on racks near the kitchen door, a frame of thin, dark ribs and paper that had never known a factory. There was a handle. There was a hook. There was a weight under it that did not touch the stones. And there was, just on the far side of that bridge, the faintest suggestion of a figure with its head dipped the way a man dips his head when he knows he is about to enter a room where someone is sleeping. I don't know how long we stood like that. The cold left and came back. My feet ached and then stopped aching. I had the sudden childish thought that if I lifted my hand, I could put my fingers in the light and feel something solid there. The way a child will reach for the white line where sun falls on a wall. The phone in my pocket buzzed once with a delayed message from a friend down in Wakayama, and that tiny, ridiculous reminder of the world where trains come when they say they will. And you can buy hot coffee from a vending machine snapped something in me. I stepped forward. If you're hoping for a big cinematic moment, there isn't one. Taro did not grab me by the collar and swing me back. He said my name in a voice that made me stop, because that voice did not belong to a 20-year-old boy. It belonged to someone much older who had already had this argument too many times. I stopped with my toes against the first plank. "Do not," he said. The wind made the paper of the lanterns along the path breathe in and out. The light on the bridge flared and then dimmed like an eye opening and closing. That was when a second sound entered the space, which is the only way I know to describe it. Until then, there had been the wind and the oil's small tick and the tiny creaks of old wood fighting cold. Now there was the quiet, even sound of footsteps farther off. Not on stone, not on wood, but on packed earth, the way the old road sounds when a cart goes by slowly. Step, step, step. The light did not turn toward it. It did not do anything except remain exactly where it was. My mind did something I wish it hadn't, and equal parts wish it had not stopped doing since. It slipped the shape of a man onto that light and made him a person in my head. In that instant, I could see him as clearly as you see a memory you have told yourself too many times. Head lowered, sleeve tucked over a small flash of aluminum, rope sandals wet with river spray. I could feel the weight of the lantern in my own hand as if I were holding it. It was not heavy. It had the balanced on your fingertips feel of something that wants to be carried and knows it will be. Taro said my name again, but softer this time, as if the hard word had already been used up. The second sound came closer and then stopped, and there was a space in the night that felt like a held breath. If I say I saw the man, I will be lying, because there was no man. There was only the light and the idea of a man where light would be if it had to be attached to a body. But if I say I didn't see him, that is a lie too, because everything in me reacted as if a person had come up beside us and nodded in that way people nod when they do not want to startle you. The heat that had been touching my thigh moved to my forearm as if a lantern had been swung from one side to another to make room. I smelled old oil and paper that had been dried too long in the sun. A polite space opened to my right. Every hair along my arm rose. My mouth filled with the taste of iron. The light on the bridge lifted the smallest amount, as if acknowledging someone. And then it slid forward, not fast, not slow, just exactly the speed of a person who knows the distance from the center of the bridge to the far side, because he has walked it 1,000 times and sees no reason to do it differently now. We did not follow. I know you want me to say we did. I want that too, in the part of me that still wakes with the taste of bitter oil in my mouth at 3 a.m. We stood until my phone said 12 past midnight and my knees had started to shake and the light had passed into the thick white breath of fog that pooled on the far side of the bridge. It did not go out. It did not disappear. It thinned until it felt rude to stare at it, like looking at a person eating in a room where you are a guest. Taro bowed, very small, and I did not ask him to explain to whom. We took one step back, then another. When we reached the path, he let out a breath I think he had been holding since we started. On the stones where the light had paused, there was a dark mark the size of my palm. I crouched without thinking and held my hand above it. The heat was real. It was the precise temperature of a kettle a few minutes after it has boiled. Too hot to touch. Warm enough to make you want to. There was a tiny black dot at the very center, as if a drop of oil had fallen and burned itself into a perfect punctuation. I thought about dipping my finger in it the way a child will with a cake when no one is looking. I did not. I stood up and followed Taro back the way we had come, and the wind carried with it the small, contented clicking of something cooling down. The next morning I woke with a bruise on my wrist in the shape of a question mark. I don't mean it looked like punctuation. I mean it curved and then stopped as if it had not decided what it was going to be. When I pressed it, it felt hotter than the rest of my skin. In the kitchen, Aya handed me a bowl of rice and said nothing until I held out my wrist without planning to. She did not say anything then either. She took my hand and turned it over and looked at my palm. There was a tiny black dot there I hadn't noticed. I didn't touch anything, I said, and I heard how it sounded. I know, she said. She took a folded towel and pushed it toward me. Take this if your hands feel cold later. It helps. Taro didn't join us for breakfast. Later, I found him sweeping the courtyard as if he had been doing it all day. He was pale in the way people are when they have not slept but did not want to admit it. When I asked if he was okay, he blinked at me like I had spoken the wrong language. It is all right, he said finally. The teacher said we did the right thing. What would have been the wrong thing? I asked. He didn't answer. He lifted the broom and let the bristles whisper over the stones. That afternoon, while a tour group shuffled and whispered their way toward the first bridge, a man in the back asked Aya a question in English. Are there any ghosts? He said with a tourist's grin that meant he wanted a good story to tell on the bus. Aya smiled in that professional way that can be read as yes or no depending on what you want to hear. You will see many names, she said. Some names still get food. The man laughed. Aya turned to me and signed for me to translate, which I did, and heard my own voice sound like it was coming from the bottom of a well. That night the light did not appear. Or if it did, someone else watched it and drew their own conclusions, which is maybe the only honest way to learn a thing like that. I kept the towel in my sleeve like I'd seen Taro do with his flashlight. Every time the wind brought the smell of oil from the lampposts, my mouth filled with the taste of iron. I left 3 days later, not because I was afraid. That would make a better ending. I left because you can only live next to a deep pool for so long without wanting to lean too far and see what's underneath. That's not bravery. It's the opposite. I knew myself. I knew I'd go back to the bridge at midnight alone if I stayed. I told Aya I had a job interview back in Osaka. She nodded and gave me a small wrapped package that turned out to be a pair of sturdy socks and a packet of heat pads. Taro bowed and said nothing. As I turned to go, he took my wrist lightly and pressed something into my palm. I didn't open my hand until I was on the bus down the mountain. It was a tiny metal hook, the kind you would use to hang a lantern from a belt. It was old and slick with oil that no longer stained my fingers but left a smell like a memory. There was a darkened dot on one side as if heat had kissed it there too many times to count. I keep the hook in a drawer I don't open often. When I do, the smell rises and sits in the air like a thought I can't chase away. I have tried to describe the man with the lantern to people who asked me why I left a perfectly good job in a place people pay money to visit and be moved. I say it was beautiful and quiet, and I slept better than I had in years, and that I was not afraid of ghosts. None of that is a lie. But the real reason is smaller and harder to share. In the kitchen, I heard Taro make that small clicking sound with his tongue, and I knew it wasn't an imitation. It was a reflex. His mouth had learned it from the oil. When I stood on the inner bridge, I knew the weight of the lantern on my fingers and the way your wrist would tilt as you lifted it. The bruise on my wrist faded to the ghost of a curve and then nothing, and the black dot on my palm washed away. But sometimes when I wake just before my alarm, I can feel heat near my arm as if something hangs at my side and is careful not to brush me. A week after I left, Aya sent me a photo of the courtyard in the first snowfall. The caption said simply, "We ate early today." I zoomed in without meaning to, looking for shapes in the shadow under the eaves. There was nothing to see. I zoomed back out and put my phone face down on the table. The room smelled like a draft had passed through it, clean and thin. In the silence, I heard it again, that small, satisfied ticking of hot oil cooling in the night. I got up, went to the window, and watched the street below until the feeling passed, and when I stepped away, the place where I had stood was warm under my feet.